Good evening all and welcome. I'd like to just thank everyone for subscribing and pressing the bell icon and keeping those notifications on. It genuinely feels like YouTube is trying to turn it off for a bunch of people, so for everyone who has returned and keeps watching, thank you. It really means the world to me. So for tonight's compilation, this particular vintage of stories is from about 1.5 to 2 years ago, so I really hope you enjoy the mix. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to volunteer several times a year at a religious retreat, and on one occasion I travelled a considerable distance to get there. As a result, I was granted accommodation in the oldest section of a building that had been standing for centuries. After a long day of travelling, I arrived fairly late in the evening and was completely exhausted and promptly collapsed into bed, kicking off my shoes without a second thought. To my surprise, I woke up abruptly around 3 in the morning to the sound of a woman's voice near my ear. Her accent was distinctly broad Yorkshire. Still groggy and not fully coherent, I mumbled the response indicating that I was fine, but within seconds, my drowsiness vanished as I found myself sitting up in bed with all the lights in the room switched on, a flood of questions racing through my mind. What had just happened? The next morning, as fate would have it, I encountered a staff member who had known me for years. Naturally, they inquired about my journey and how I fared. I recounted the details of my uneventful trip, but couldn't resist mentioning the strange occurrence from the previous night. Surprisingly, the staff member immediately asked which room I had stayed in, and upon revealing the room number, they responded with a knowing expression, revealing that that particular room was always the last to be rented out when the rest of the guest accommodation was fully occupied. Throughout my time at this retreat, I had encountered numerous other peculiar experiences. However, this one in particular has left a lasting impression on my memory. This story was some years ago. I was about 17 years old. I was super late. I honestly had no business being outside at the time. It was midsummer, so the night was cool and breezy. I was in downtown. I was leaving a friend's house because I fell asleep but didn't want to sleep over. I left to her house and took the long way home. The shortcut would have been faster, but it was at 2 a.m, and the shortcut included crossing the train tracks. There was a train that could or could not be on its way, and if there was a train coming, I would have to wait to pass it among the rubble of abandoned factories. If that wasn't scary enough in the middle of the night, there's dangerous hobos and crackheads that sleep around there. I didn't want to fight for my life, so I figured I'd go around getting on my street a few blocks from my place. The street was dead but well lit. The corner store I frequented was now closed, so I knew I was out late because it was always open. I kept walking. I was about 8 minutes away from home when I noticed a van just coasting behind. And when I mean coasting, they were driving as if they were looking for parking on an empty street with nothing open. So I sped up and passed the basketball court across the street from my house, the white van still coasting behind. I came to a stoplight and crossed the street. Where my apartment was at the bottom of the hill and was behind a small corner store, and behind the corner store was the driveway to the apartment. Across the street was the police department. Straight up the hill was a college, and the sidewalk had no lights walking up. The only apartments were across from the dark sidewalk, but were gated and would mostly be no help in an emergency. So I get to the store and continue walking, the van now catching up to me. My heart began to beat faster. I was thinking, okay, oh my god, I'm gonna get kidnapped. As I took the turn to my driveway, the white van sped away. I ran down the driveway, took a sharp left to my back door with my keys in hand. As I turned the key, I could hear footsteps coming down the driveway. I get to the house, lock the door, and stand in the kitchen in the still darkness waiting to hear if the steps would come up the back stairs. It was quiet, so the clicking noises in the apartment made me on edge. I waited for a while, and heard no extra noises, so I settled in. The next day, my grandfather was upset that I came in past curfew, and he gave me the longest speech about being out so late. How people in the 70s would steal women like me off the streets and force them into sex workers and stuff like that. I told him he was right, and apologized and that I wouldn't do it again. I'll never forget that white van and the potential horrors that could have awaited me had I kept walking in the dark up the hill near the college for any longer. I lived in an apartment in this old, beautiful house in New Orleans. I lived with my boyfriend at the time, and we got this insane deal. It was $600 to rent a massive, stunning apartment with hardwood floors and a huge ceiling. My boyfriend worked in the oil field and would often go offshore, leaving me alone. 99% of the things that happened was when I was alone. One day, I got out of the shower and the mirror was fogged up. I leaned over while I was brushing my teeth, and when I looked up, the mirror was wiped in a circle where my face was. This happened only a few times. It was wiped away where my face was when I looked up from brushing my teeth each time. But when it did happen, it happened in the same way every time. While I was sleeping, I often heard things crashing, and also often heard footsteps in the attic. My boyfriend also heard the steps in the attic and went to check it out. No one was up there. I came home from getting groceries, put on the gas stove, and got a feeling of being watched. All looked up. From 2 to 3 seconds of me coming in and putting the groceries down, I look up, and all of the cabinets were suddenly open 90 degrees. I closed the doors and tried to recreate it happening, which it couldn't. I brushed it off, went back to put groceries away, and got another creepy feeling. I looked up, and all the cabinet doors were open again at a perfect 90-degree angle, while my back was turned. All the burners turned on, full blast. Every night, we heard footsteps or someone walking slowly in high heels up and down the hallway for hours. The apartment next to us was a huge mirror image of ours, and the walls were thin. My boyfriend thought that the guy next to us had a lady over, and I said, no woman would wear high heels on hardwood floors, walking back and forth. They would have taken them off. Only a man who has a fetish to wear heels would do that. Turns out our neighbor worked as a nurse, doing the night shift, and wasn't home at those hours anyway. I was going to sleep one day, but I was scared, so I left the hallway light on. I heard the footsteps and was too scared to sleep. I looked up and saw an evil being, a man, but he looked like half a man, half a monster, walk into the doorway of the room, stop, and turn towards me. I had never been so scared. I was paralyzed with fear. He came into the room, stood at the left side of the bed and sat down. I felt like I was being electrocuted the entire time he was looking at me. It felt like an eternity. I think I passed out from fear. I woke up in the morning and panicked. I felt like it happened, but kept trying to convince myself that it was a nightmare. One night my boyfriend and I were watching a movie in the dark. We heard the sound of the wood floor creaking, and we both looked over to see an evil-looking, older, ugly woman glaring at us. We both looked at each other. I knew by looking at him that he saw it too. That was the day I went from thinking I was paranoid to living in full fear. The most terrifying part? Our dishwasher broke, and these handymen came to install the new one. One guy said to the other, "Hurry up, I hate being in this apartment." I asked him to explain why, and he said he'll only talk to me outside. He said that a serial killer lived in the apartment and killed women who were all the same age, who looked similar, in the French Quarter. He was a cross-dresser and walked up and down the hallway in heels. The FBI found a headless body and searched the entire property for the head but never found it. They looked in the attic and found traces of him living up there at some point. In case you're curious, 2835 General Pershing, New Orleans, is the address. Last winter, I was driving down the freeway at night, going between suburbs of a large metropolitan area, so there were plenty of cars around, but it was maybe around midnight or so, and it had been snowing. I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder of the freeway with a guy standing next to it, clearly in need of some assistance. I saw them as I was driving past, but since it was later at night and was cold, I figured I might as well take the next exit, loop around, and see if the guy still needed help. I get there, and it's a middle-aged, working-class type of guy standing outside his pickup. He's wearing blue overalls, is slender and slightly balding, and puts off what I can only describe as a weird vibe, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But it was one of those weird gut feelings that you aren't sure why you feel. He says that he's been having car troubles. It's from about 2 hours out of town, and that his alternator is shot, and that his battery needs a boost. I've owned a car with a shot alternator, and know that when the battery dies you need to boost it for a little while if you're going to get things running again. I tell him it's no problem, commiserate with him for a minute, and pop my hood, and he says he's going to grab his cables. When he comes back, I notice in his hand he has some sort of concealed metal object. No clue what it was. I saw it for just a brief moment, and saw that it wasn't a knife, but that it was metal and a little shorter than the length of his hand, and he was clearly trying to conceal it from my view. This all happened so fast, and I am immediately on high alert. I see for a split second as he's bringing the cables to me so that I can hook up my battery. I instantly take a step back to put some distance between us and tell him that he can hook up my battery and I'll wait in the car. All the while in instantaneous full fight or flight mode, getting ready to block an attack if he were to lunge at me. He doesn't, and starts connecting the cables to my battery, and as I'm sitting in my car, I start to wonder if I was imagining things as he connects the battery, and we both wait for the battery to charge. Maybe it was just something that was bundled in with the cables, and that he just had in his hand. Perhaps I misread the situation as dangerous. After a few minutes he goes to start his car, shouts that it isn't working, and then walks back towards my car while he waits in front of mine. After a few minutes of waiting, he puts his head back under the hood of my car to fiddle with the cables. All the while, I'm watching him intently to make sure he doesn't come to the car window because I was still spooked. He shouts some things about how it isn't working and asks me to come and take a look. I open my window a bit and casually tell him not to worry and that it's probably going to take some time. Luckily, I can just barely see my battery in the dark. Through the gap under the propped hood of my car through the windshield directly in front of me, I see him fiddle with the cables and hear him shout again that it isn't working and for me to come out. Then I see him slip the metal object I had seen earlier and see him touch it to my battery terminal as sparks shoot out from where he touched it. He starts yelling and jumps back, and I immediately jump out of my car and tell him that something came up and that I needed to go now. I honestly don't remember much of what he was trying to say as I cut him off or what exactly I said. I just remember saying that I needed to get out of there without taking my eyes off him for even half a second. I don't remember even how the cables came off my battery. Did I pull them out? Were they already off? But I slammed that hood, jumped in my car and drove off. I still have no idea what his plan was, no clue what he was trying to do, or what on earth he was trying to make happen. But I do know for a fact that what I saw him do was in no way what he was telling me he was going to do. But as I left him there and drove off, I was practically pinching myself, trying to make heads or tails of what just happened. And I can't stress this enough, that the guy just gave off the weirdest vibes, like the hills have eyes kind of weird vibes. Maybe he was planning on trying to short my battery so that I was stuck there. But to this day, I wonder if I encountered some sort of mass murderer who had been planning on kidnapping someone at the side of a freeway as they stopped to help. Who knows, but either way it was strange as hell. He right spooked me, and I noped the hell away from that dude as fast as humanly possible. I still wish I had gotten a license plate or something to give to the cops, but in that moment, the only thing going through my mind was to remove myself from that situation as fast as humanly possible. I've experienced many odd and unexplainable events in my life, but this event has been on my mind for a few years, and I finally wish to share it, and pray I'm not the only one who's experienced something like this. I graduated high school in 2019, and was promoted to supervisor for a kitchen in a nursing home down the street. Since I oversaw dinner, I didn't start work until about 3 p.m. and would get home around 10. So for the first half of the day, I would be completely home alone. I enjoyed that time. Solitude was always nice, especially when you're as introverted as I am. Normally I would sleep in until about noon, but this time I decided to relax on the couch in our main living room and watch Kitchen Nightmares. I remember nodding off and falling into a light sleep, so any small noise would wake me up. The first few times I cracked my eyes open, it would just be from the cats jumping on me. So when I felt the cushion by my feet dip a bit, I figured it was my cat, Peach. After a moment I opened my eyes and realized my younger sister was sitting at the end of the couch, her back to me. I was half asleep, so I really didn't think much of it. I figured she just stayed home from school sick. So I just asked her if she could move her head so that I could see the TV, but she ignored me, still facing the TV screen. Annoyed, I asked her why she was home. Once again she remained silent, coming to the conclusion that she was just being rude. Again, I closed my eyes and fell back asleep. After about another hour, I got up and started to get ready for work, and noticed my sister wasn't in the room or in the house. Concerned, I called her. After trying to call her for a few minutes and getting nothing, I called my mother. She picked up, and I asked her if my sister told her where she was going to be. My mother, confused, asked me what I was talking about. She had dropped my sister off at school before going to work. My sister had been at school this whole time. In shock, I hung up and kept this to myself, convinced I was losing my mind, that it was all in my head. But I remember that moment so vividly. What my sister was wearing, how she was sitting, how I felt a shift in the couch when she sat down. This wasn't a dream. It had to be real. There was something in my house with me that morning, and it was not my sister. I kept this next experience to myself. As a kid, I had what my parents called a very active imagination, always seeing and hearing things and being easily spooked. So I think it got to a point where I just convinced myself this whole experience didn't happen, and that there was some kind of rational explanation. It actually took me a few years to tell my little sister about this. Once again, mostly out of fear of being perceived as crazy, and I didn't want to spook my sister, but something she said to me changed that real fast. This takes place in September of 2022. My sister and I were waiting in line for a ride at a local amusement park. Every year, my dad's workplace would rent the whole park for employees and their families. We spent most of the day together as a family, but about an hour before closing, my sister and I went to the back of the park to ride some night rides, so it was just the two of us, and the waiting was getting terribly boring. My sister and I aren't very close and don't have that much in common, so we struggled to have a conversation and for the most part stood in silence. But out of the blue, she spoke up. "Cat, want to hear something freaky?" As a lover of all things spooky, that caught my attention, so I immediately replied with an eager, "Yeah?" And part of me wishes I'd said no. My sister is a night owl, and over the summer would stay up until 6 a.m. I had just started working a different job after quitting my nursing home position. That's another scary story for a different day. So I was starting to go to bed at midnight every night, and would be up at 10 a.m. She would be the only one awake. One night, she noticed light coming from the crack in her bedroom, and she heard both my voice and our mother's voice talking. Only it was hard to understand, as if we were either speaking too quickly or just complete gibberish. She quickly grabbed her phone, checking the time, and her confusion only grew when she noticed it was 3 a.m. What were we doing awake? Sometimes my mum and I would go to the front window if the weather was bad during the night to keep an eye on the storm, or if there were sirens. We both have a habit of being very nosy, so she figured that's what was going on. A few minutes later, she could still hear the voices and see the lights, growing curious. She got out of bed and opened her bedroom door and rushed into the hall, expecting to see me and my mother by the window talking. Only that's not what she saw. There were no lights on. It was completely dark beside the illumination from her phone screen, and there was no one in sight. Not our mother, not me. Not even the cats were out there. Unsettled and confused, she turned to my bedroom door thinking I was messing with her. She opened my door, and I was asleep with both cats. She goes back in the hall. Mum and Dad's bedroom door is also shut. She peeks in there, and both are sleeping. Now, my sister is a rational person. She was always the one to go in the basement first, tell the others that monsters and ghosts aren't real. So she completely pushed this event out of her mind because in her eyes it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was just overtired, or our grandfather's TV downstairs was a bit loud and that's what she heard. But like my own experience, this kind of sat in the back of her head, and the house grew to be a little less comfortable. She mentioned how after she felt like this, there was always someone watching, as if they were tucked in a corner just observing her. She wasn't scared out of her mind, just a bit confused. When she told me that, a pit in my stomach opened up and I had chills. I laughed at first because, come on, we're in public and I didn't want to flip out. So we went on the ride, and for the remaining time at the park, we pushed that conversation on the back burner. On our way home to meet up with our parents, we started talking about it again, and I finally told her about what happened to me, how I saw her at home that day, spoke to her, and could remember what she wore. That was the first time I saw her get scared. "I wasn't home," she kept saying. "What do you think it was then?" We still don't know. We don't know if we want to know. The only thing we know for sure is there is something in our house. I used to work at the prestigious hotel Barnsley Garden, which is considered the #1 resort in Georgia. The place has a haunting backstory involving the Barnsley brothers, where one of them tragically murdered the other. They've turned the house where the incident occurred into a museum, preserving the very spot where his blood stained the floor. Although I'm not a believer in ghosts, I had an encounter that left me questioning my skepticism. While I was working in the kitchen one day, a man entered and simply stood there, seemingly lost in thought. Puzzled, I asked if he needed assistance, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on me. Feeling uneasy, I decided to step out of the kitchen briefly to find someone else to help. However, when we returned, the man had vanished without a trace. It was an inexplicable disappearance that left me perplexed. At a later time, I visited the museum dedicated to the Barnsley brothers' story, and as I strolled through, I happened to glance at a large portrait hanging on the wall, and my jaw dropped in disbelief. It was the very same peculiar man I had encountered in the kitchen. An eerie sensation of cold chills swept over me, causing goosebumps to appear all over my body. I couldn't comprehend what it meant or how to make sense of it, but the image of that man's face stayed imprinted in my memory, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something inexplicable. Driven by curiosity, I searched for more pictures of him within the house, hoping to find some confirmation or perhaps a different appearance that would explain my experience. To my astonishment, the pictures I found only reinforced my belief that this was indeed the same man. The encounters and the stories I heard about Barnsley being haunted suddenly began to align in my mind. Perhaps against my prior beliefs, there was some truth to the haunting tales surrounding Barnsley Gardens. When I was a kid of around 6, we took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house a short walking distance from the beach. We went to the beach and I was supposed to stay in sight of my mum, but I wandered way down and before I knew it I was lost. A lot of the houses looked the same and I wasn't sure which one was ours, plus I couldn't see my mum anywhere. It started to rain. I came to a path that I was pretty sure led back to our house, only it didn't lead to a house at all, but instead to a parking lot. There was a big dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around, and I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair and hot pink tank top and those big, clunky, thick glasses that were popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. She said something like, "Oh my, it's raining, where's your mummy? Let me take you to her. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning." She was very friendly, almost overly so. In the driver's seat was an overweight man without a shirt, hairy, grey chest, and some clunky gold chain. He was wearing yellow-tinted Elvis shades and staring at me intently. He was also smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me. She asked how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning we've got all types of cereal." I had been taught all about stranger danger, but at this point in my life, no adult had ever given me reason to not trust them. The lady continued talking about stuff, like how boys have go-karts and how they like to drink chocolate milk. She made it seem very enticing for a 7-year-old kid at that point, and I trusted her. I mostly liked the idea of getting to play with some kids my age. Then I remembered that I needed to ask my mum first. I told her this. She told me that there was no problem, that they lived up the road, and my mum wouldn't mind. It started raining harder, and she opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Now let's get you out of this rain and go find your mummy." I knew logically that I shouldn't do this, but the lady seemed really nice, and I was desperate wanting to get out of the rain. As I walked towards the open door of the van, I noticed an awful stench that made me gag. This set off alarm bells in my head that something wasn't right. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. I looked up at the fat man who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but had this really creepy toothy smile, and his teeth were stained a dark yellow. I could pick up a very messed up vibe from him. I knew now that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry up and get in. Her demeanor changed. She was now demanding and trying to literally push me into the van. She sounded angry and said, "Get in already," in a tone that was the complete opposite of how she sounded before. I jumped to the side and started running as fast as I could. The woman managed to grab my arm or wrist, but somehow I was able to quickly break free and run to the beach. I think she tried to chase me, but as I said, she was very overweight. I made it back to my mum, who was freaking out. I tried explaining what happened, but I don't think that at 7 years old I was able to convey the gravity of what happened, and I didn't fully understand it myself. It wasn't until years later I could properly convey the horror of it to my mother. I didn't really understand what happened to me that day. I slept just fine that same night and even forgot about the incident until I was almost a teenager, remembered it and told my friend, and they helped me realize how I seriously dodged a bullet there. I was in shock myself to realize it. Pretty sure my parents freaked out with what little I could tell them on the day, but they didn't want to ask too much so that it wouldn't haunt me. I also have a female friend who has a story eerily similar to this. There are lots of unsolved true crime cases from the early 80s in the suburbs of Iowa about a 12-year-old boy named Johnny Gosh. He was snatched up on his paper route. There were witnesses and it was a huge deal. He's the reason they started putting missing people on milk cartons. His mum still hasn't given up on him. At least a few other kids went missing in that neighborhood. It was a really interesting case, with people coming from everywhere. One man claiming years later that he was imprisoned with Johnny in a crawl space in Colorado under a house being used as a ring for horrific things for children. But I think the guy was mentally unstable, but who knows. I know he took them back to the house and showed them the crawl space, and I'm fairly certain Johnny's initials had been carved into a wooden beam. He claimed they were chained up there at some point. There are so many things wrong with so many people, and I'm so glad I never got to find out what horrors awaited with those people had I gone with them. My dad and I flip houses for a living. We do everything. So house renovations can take anywhere from a few months to a year and up. Here's what happened to us in this 100-plus-year-old farmhouse in northwest New Jersey about 3 years ago. This old farmhouse was beautiful, but extremely run down. It had sat vacant prior to us purchasing it for 15 years. There was evidence that squatters had been there at some point. The house had good bones, as they say, so it wasn't really worth tearing down and starting from scratch. The first part of our job is the cleanup and demolition. I noticed that every house has its own vibe and energy. However, this old farmhouse was different. It was 4 floors, including basement and attic, and any time you were downstairs on the main floor, or kitchen, living room / office area, it felt fine, even normal. But when you went upstairs, it was different. There was a heaviness up there. I would announce every time I came into the house, "Hey, it's just me. Is it cool if I do such and such?" I would also announce myself every time I came into the house downstairs with a, "Hey, how you doing today?" My dad would look at me like I was crazy, because I never did this anywhere else. I don't know why I did it here. I just felt the need to, like a deep itch in my brain, pleading me to say it. So I did. Each and every time. Within the first few days of the clean-out and demo, my dad had found something disturbing. In the master bedroom upstairs, there was a small closet with a light in it. Hanging on the inside of the closet door, on a coat hook, was a bloody dog collar. There were weird symbols spray-painted only in this closet. Something looked like it had been burned in a pile on the floor of the closet. I refused to touch it, and got extremely upset at the sight of the dog collar. Furious even. Why would anyone do something to a poor animal like this? I was so bothered my dad told me to go home for the day, and I did. It makes me sick thinking about the sick people who would do something like that. My dad and other co-workers cleaned it out. Also, the light in that closet, we could never get it to work. We do minor electrical repairs and couldn't figure it out. Even had a master electrician come, and they couldn't get it to work either. New light fixture, new wiring, new everything. Nothing worked. But when we had finished cleaning out the living quarters, we decided to work on the attic and basement. The basement was okay. Honestly, the bottom half of the house was fine. But the attic was terrible. I couldn't bring myself to go up there. Not to be an arse. I worked on the other floors of the house. My dad understood, without me even having to explain, which speaks volumes because he's a real skeptic. One day I had to hold the flashlight for my dad while he was in the attic. I stood on the stairs with only my head and upper torso sticking into the attic space. The light wouldn't work up there either. This attic had one of those pull-downs from the ceiling/foldable ladders. It was located in the hallway between the master bedroom, second bedroom, and only bathroom. The second we opened it, a rank smell hit us hard in the face. Death for sure. Something must have died up there. There were those large black flies that seemed to swarm to rot and death everywhere. To say it was an infestation of flies is an understatement. I stood on the ladder, nearly falling multiple times from the ferocious swatting of these demon bugs. My dad looked everywhere for the cause of the flies for days and couldn't find anything. Before we sold the house, we finally got the flies to go away. This was after months of trying. However, when the new owner chose to rent the house out, the flies kept coming back. To this day, almost 3 years later, exterminators and pest control have been called, but the flies always return. The master bedroom had something else happen after the closet was cleaned up. I talked to my dad into burying the dog collar. There were 4 windows in the master, 2 windows on the north wall and 2 on the west. The north wall windows one day suddenly had 2 bats on them. They were somehow wedged between the glass and the screen of this old window. We needed to replace all the windows, and we tried everything to free the bats without hurting them. We worked during the day, so bats being nocturnal, we figured it explained why they never moved during the day. When we would come the next day, they seemed to have moved overnight, so we knew they were alive. These poor bats had me seriously fretting. Any dead bugs I found during the cleanup, I would put on this windowsill hoping they would eat them. I know it's weird, but I'm a die-hard animal lover. I appreciate they were stuck, and it was killing me to see them like that. It made no logical sense how they got there either. Also, it was early summer, so they weren't hibernating either. My dad and I decided to get a ladder and try from the outside of the house. He finally got it so the bats could undoubtedly get out. The bats never moved from that window screen for weeks. Then one day they were gone. I thought for a long time my dad had discovered they were dead and disposed of them not to upset me. He promises he didn't do that, and after weeks of them moving barely inches, they had indeed left of their own volition. We finished the house and sold it. The new owner rented it out to tenants. The tenants would move in, stay for a month or 2, break lease and leave. This happened 4 times since we finished. After each move, we were contracted to come and do a fresh coat of paint, deep clean, patch up a hole or 2 or fix anything else that needed. But the feeling in the house never changed. I should also mention we did inform the new owner of the weirdness prior to purchase. My dad is a skeptical guy and has no explanation for any of it. My dad also now announces himself any time we go into the house. We met every tenant that lived there at some point in their rental line. They all seemed like normal people, not the type to break leases for no reason. I feel like the house needs a cleanse or something. To whoever did something to that poor dog, may you reap what you sow. I was 16 and had just gotten my license, and I had a part-time job, so I was able to buy a car. It was a super old car and quite unreliable, but I was the only one in my friend group that had a car, so I was always the driver. Well, one night, after working, I offered to drive my friends home because it started snowing. One of my friends lived around 20 miles out of town. I'd never been there before, but I figured I'd be able to find my way. It was all pretty much dark dirt roads in the country, and this was before the era of smartphones being commonplace. I dropped her off and was sure I'd be able to find my way back to the highway. Of course, I ended up getting lost. I had a track phone, and the service absolutely sucked. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to think back to the turns I took, when I hear the car door open. I look over to see this creepy dude attempting to get in. He had come out of nowhere from a field next to where I parked, I freaked out and took off. A few days later at work, my friend who I had dropped off told me that an old man and his wife were murdered by someone breaking in. Scared the crap out of me, but I never told anyone because they wouldn't have believed me. The guy ended up getting caught on the same night. I work as an EMT for an ambulance company. EMS has always been full of superstitions, and most of us believe in the supernatural on account of all the crazy, gruesome stuff we get to see on any given shift. Every company, every EMT, every firefighter has a story about a station that is haunted or something that happened to them that can only be explained as paranormal. For the company I work at, we have about 5 stations, each with their own stories. Only 1 or 2 truly scary stories though. Mostly things like employees seeing shadows out of the corner of their eyes, getting uneasy feelings in the stations, or hearing an unexplained knock, voice, or being hissed or growled at occasionally. The station I worked at was no different. The station I work at is our main station, meaning that is where we keep all of our extra resupply. So it's not uncommon for various crews to be going in and out of the station at all hours of the day. It was common knowledge that the ambulance bay was creepy at night, and people reported hearing voices, footsteps, or ambulance doors opening and closing out of the garage. Now I've worked at this station for 2 years, and I've heard these things, but it's always been easy to dismiss this as my partner doing something out in the bay, or another crew doing some late-night resupply. The only experience I've had there that I couldn't explain was that I was distinctly growled at in the garage late at night. At the time, I quickly realized that the only person in the bay was me, and I certainly didn't growl at myself and quickly left. That was all I ever experienced there, and for the most part felt very comfortable at that station, until last night. This station is small and consists of a living room with a kitchenette attached to a hallway. This hallway led to the garage on one side, the bathroom on the other, and at the end of the hallway is a door leading to the junior's bedroom, which you can then walk through to get to the senior's bedroom. If you go into the garage, there's a staircase that leads into the attack that stretches above the entire living quarters of the station. Me, Junior, and my partner, Senior, are dead asleep in our respective bedrooms, all the doors closed, when I'm awoken to all these loud banging noises and the walls shaking. I realize that this banging isn't just banging, but actually running. Something heavy, huge, and fast is stomping and running around in the attack upstairs. It's stomping and running so loud it is quite literally shaking the walls. Whatever it was must have been huge to be making sounds this loud. Then it gets faster. It's so fast and loud it's running across the entire length of the attack. It is moving faster than anything can move. This stomping is happening one right after another. It almost sounded like there were 10 people up there, or a creature with too many legs running right above my head. It's so fast. It's too fast. I'm sitting upright in bed now, huddled in the corner of the bedroom, absolutely horrified. I get this deep, visceral, primal feeling of dread, almost like what prey feels like when they're being hunted. And suddenly, it's as if a thought from somewhere else is placed into my mind, and I just know, with every fiber of my being, that it knows that I'm awake, and that it knows I know it's there. Like a sick, twisted version of that Spider-Man meme. In between the stomping and running I can hear barking, whirring sounds. It's hard to describe, like a grunt mixed with the sound of the wind. It's making the sound as it runs. I realize that it's moving so fast I can hear the wind it's creating swooshing and whipping around as it grunts and runs. So now, I very silently get up, and I walk over to the senior bedroom and try to open the door, but it's been locked. I feel as though I can't make a noise or it will come through the station and kill me. I'm quietly knocking on the door. I'm crying, pleading for my partner to let me in. I'm thinking this is so loud, there's no way she's asleep. But she is. She's out cold and I don't get a response. I decide that my partner had the right idea, and I crept over to the junior bedroom separating from my bedroom from the hallway that leads to the garage and the rest of the station, and lock the door. So I silently creep back over to my corner of the bed, and with my blankets begin to text her. It's 1:45, and I'm begging her to wake up over text and describing what I'm hearing. She's not answering, so I text her fiancé and ask him to call her and wake her up, but he's not answering either. It's at this point I decide to text my mum. As I'm sitting there, I get a familiar feeling to before, an intense dread, a stark realization of pure truth. It doesn't even feel like my own thought, more like a piece of truth was just slipped to me by the universe. The thing upstairs isn't human. I'm explaining to my mum what I'm hearing, all these loud swishing wind sounds and stomping and running. Then I hear it run down the stairs. When I tell you, my heart stopped and my soul left my body. When I heard it coming down the stairs, my stomach dropped to my arse and I was nauseous. I genuinely thought I was going to die. I was waiting for it to start pounding on the door, and I have never been more thankful in my life because I thought to have locked it earlier. I was waiting for screaming or the door to start shaking or something, but it never came. It ran impossibly fast and headed back up the stairs. Down the stairs, up the stairs, across the attack, down the attack above my head in circles, down the stairs, up the stairs, all over. Now, I am absolutely hysterical on the phone with my mum. No one ever prepared me for dealing with being haunted or taunted by an entity. My mum is trying to calm me down. She asks, "What do you want me to do?" I didn't know. I don't know what she can do. I don't know what to do. I just whisper, "I don't know what to do. Just please don't hang up." She tells me to bang on my partner's door to wake her up, and I do. My partner wakes up and hears the rustling in her bedroom, and she goes, "Yeah," in a dismissive voice, and slowly walks over to the door and opens it. I literally shoved her back in the room, whipped around faster than I've ever moved in my life, closed the door and locked it. I explained everything to her, everything I heard. The activity was dying down now, but it was still active enough for her to hear the running upstairs too, at 2:45 a.m. Another crew would get here at 3, so we got to our station to put their truck away and clock out to go home. Me and my partner, huddled together glued to each other's hips, hurried outside to meet with them out in the building parking lot. It's only at this point that we realize that a completely separate crew from around 11 p.m. that night had not only left our truck full of medical equipment and drugs unlocked out in the parking lot in an area known for being not so great, but also left our garage door open, literally giving anyone access to our entire station. Me and my partner are terrified and aren't willing to go back into the station at this point. The crew that's getting off at 3 goes into the station to clock out, and when they come back, they see us hanging out in our truck. They joke with us for a minute over the ghost and make fun of us for sleeping in the truck for the rest of the shift. We ask them if they've ever heard anything, to which the senior on that crew, who has been there for a long time and staunchly believes in the supernatural, says, "Yeah, it definitely sounds like there's someone walking up there, but he's harmless." Me and my partner are just like, "Harmless? That thing's not harmless." They leave, and we decided to call for PD to make sure it wasn't some crackhead that had gotten in while the garage door had been left open. PD get there and searched very thoroughly and found no evidence of anyone being there. It's 4 a.m. We notify our dispatch the station was cleared to be safe by PD, and together we venture back inside. We elected to keep the truck in the parking lot so that we would have to go back to the garage if we got a call or needed to make a quick escape from the demon. and together we huddled together in the living room, with all the lights on, until we got off at 7 a.m. I heard a few minor bumps and bangs, but nothing crazy. Things that could be dismissed as house noises and whatnot, but I barely slept, and I'm not looking forward to going back there later this week. After a few days, the activity was nowhere near as crazy as what happened last time, but there was some activity. Most of the shift was perfectly fine. We were busy and out of the station most of the day, and a few times through the night. However, while we were in the station, there was some tension. The air was thick with our own anxiety, and I'm sure this is what caused what I'm about to tell you. For some context, out in the bay there is a cage. It's literally a large metal cage that runs along the back of the garage, and it is where we keep all of our resupply. The door to the cage is supposed to be perpetually locked. This is to prevent crews from going in and messing up company inventory. The only people with keys to the cage are the supervisors, who don't come in until around 7 a.m. I was laying in bed, half awake, half asleep, staring at the ceiling, when I heard what sounded like the cage door being intensely rattled by something. It didn't sound like someone was trying to open it. It sounded like someone grabbed a hold of the door and just started shaking it violently. This went on for about a minute. I went to my partner's bedroom to see if she heard it, and found that she slept right through it. We sat there for about half an hour listening for it, and nothing. At 5:30, I can hear distinct footsteps up in the attic. Nothing crazy like the insane marathon running from the other day, but quiet footsteps nonetheless. My partner says she can't hear them, so I just go back to my room. At 6:30, I can still hear an occasional footstep up there, and to be clear, no one goes up there because it's creepy, and there's nothing up there. Just some old boxes and an extremely dark attic space. Because I was only hearing footsteps, I decided to go out to the garage and investigate, and when I get into the garage, the footsteps stop. There was no one in there. When I went over to the cage to try and recreate the noise I heard, I found the door was open. I'm not totally convinced that it was just a person opening the cage a bit aggressively. The only problem is that I have no idea who it would be, because as I said, there are only a few people who have a key to the cage and none of them were here. And they don't have to get here for a few more hours. I went back inside, and I could hear the footsteps upstairs, and now what sounded like in the garage. I tried to record them, but they were too faint to pick up on video. I also want to point out, the crew we met outside the other day was making fun of us for hanging out in the truck. We had made comments about how he likes to do resupply and slam the cage door, though I guess today he just wanted to rattle it. I'm not totally convinced what happened today was a ghost and not a person, but I'm also not totally convinced that it was a person and not a ghost. Back in 1985 and 86, my friend and I experienced something unforgettable. We were working summer jobs at an old retreat in North Carolina mountains, along with around 50 other young adults. The place had a mix of modern buildings, but the focal point was a grand white structure constructed in 1912. The building in many ways seemed to be an extension of the surrounding mountains, utilizing materials from its immediate surroundings, including trees, rocks, and boulders for its foundation. With 3 stories plus a basement and an attic full of bats, the building had a unique character. Each evening, it was a fascinating sight to witness the bats pour out from the attic. At the front of the building, there was a magnificent portico adorned with 3 stories of white columns, offering an awe-inspiring view of the majestic Smoky Mountains from the collection of rocking chairs. However, it was the back of the building where we carried out our work. 2 large wings formed a U-shape hugging the rear of the building. To access our housekeeping facilities, we needed to use a fire escape that led directly to the 2nd floor rear entrance, a single green metal door that I had become well acquainted with during my 3 summers in the housekeeping department. It was a substantial heavy door with a pull handle on the outside and a push bar on the inside. Despite fire regulations requiring it to remain closed at all times, we would prop it open during the day with a bucket of water, disregarding the rules in the sweltering summer heat. A few nights before we were set to leave, while cleaning out the dorms and trying to turn the occasion into a celebration, we ran out of cleaning supplies. At around 9 o'clock at night, my best friend and I lazily decided to drive down to the back of the building to fetch more. Although the distance was short, we preferred to avoid walking up the steep incline. I parked my car directly in front of the stairs, and as we stepped out, an odd feeling began to creep over us. The air was still and stuffy, and an overwhelming sense of being enveloped by the building took a hold as we stood amidst the massive wings. With the entire building engulfed in darkness, locked up for the winter shutdown, we felt an eerie presence. Earlier in the day, my friend had been with me when I locked the door at the top of the stairs. As we ascended the steps, we found a sense of oppression settling upon us, causing both of us to halt. I expressed my fear, as my friend admitted to feeling the same. It was an unfamiliar sensation, as I had spent plenty of time alone in that building, exploring its basement and attic. We hesitantly pressed forwards, taking a few more steps, when suddenly, I experienced an icy chill coursing down my spine. I know it may sound like a cliché, but I can assure you, I have never felt anything quite like it before or since. It was as if someone had dragged an icy cold object along the length of my back. Finally, we reached the top of the stairs, and the moment I set foot on the landing, the door swung wide open, revealing the short entrance bathed in the eerie red glow of the exit sign. It beckoned us inside, but there was no sense of welcome, only an overwhelming feeling of dread. In fact, I can honestly say that I have never been more terrified in my entire life. Even now, 37 years later, just thinking about it sends chills down my spine. We both stood there, stunned for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the inexplicable event that had just unfolded. Eventually the shock wore off, and I couldn't contain my fear any longer, and I erupted into an incoherent scream, panic overriding any rational thought in a state of utter terror. I hastily descended the steps, taking far more than necessary in my hurried descent. My friend followed suit, and together we ran up the steep incline, yelling and screaming, leaving my car behind in the process. The commotion attracted the attention of everyone else at the retreat, and they joined us in searching the building. As expected, the building was empty, and upon reaching the door it was tightly shut and secured. There was no way someone could have pushed open the door and escaped without us hearing them. The floors creaked loudly with every step, and any attempt to run away would have created a commotion. I have analyzed the incident from every possible angle, but even after all these years I still have no rational explanation for what happened that night. This happened in the late 2000s when I was 12. I grew up and live in a developing nation, so many of you listening may not completely understand or relate to the circumstances in the incident, but I will try my best to give the necessary background. I was never given permission by my parents to stay out after 7 p.m. for any reason, regardless of the requirement. A movie that ends at 6:30 p.m. and I was dropped home by my friend's parents? No. Study at my neighbor's house past 7? No. So I was naturally very excited when I got permission to go watch a late-night movie with all my cousins and stay at my grandma's place. We were 6, 5 male and 1 female cousin. I was the youngest. The rest were all adults in their mid-20s. The movie finished at 2 a.m., and we were asked to go straight from the movie theater to home, which was nearby. I was more than excited to see the city late at night and watch a new movie that was a big hit. We all went in 3 motorcycles to the theater and decided that once the movie was over, we would go to a cafe that was open 24/7 to have some ice cream. This was the only place that would still be open and was relatively far away from my grandparents' house. I can't tell you how excited all of us were, because this was a new place that opened up in the city and was very popular. My friends used to brag about how many times they'd been and how beautiful the view of the city lake was from the middle of the night. Once the movie was over and we were outside, except from the crowd from the theater, the roads were completely deserted, with not a soul in sight. Only the streetlights lit up the roads filled with potholes and nothing. Not even the medical pharmacies were open. My female cousin had extremely strict parents, so she declined to come and said she had to be home because her parents were waiting for her to get back. We all attempted to convince her to come with us. We were 6 after all, but to no end. She was adamant that she had to get home, and we all eventually decided to let her go. We were now 4 of us, on 2 motorcycles, and began riding to the cafe. I was the pillion with my brother riding, and I noticed that one motorcycle was following us. It was easy, as they were the only other people on the road. I told my brother immediately, and he said they're probably going to the same place and to ignore them. A little further along, another motorcycle asked my cousin to stop and pretended to ask for directions. They stopped, thinking these guys were lost. While we were talking to the guys asking for directions, 2 more motorcycles showed up and surrounded us. Somehow, 8 of them. At this point we realized this was an ambush, but it was already too late. One of the guys pushed my cousin from the motorcycle onto the ground and began hitting him. The rest of us were trying to defend him. Once the fighting ceased, one of the cousins was bleeding everywhere, and they began to ask us for our female cousin and tell her to come back. They had been following us from the theater. They said, "Tell her you just need to talk to her and ask her to come back. He needs to see her." At first, we pretend we had no women with us. We don't know what he's talking about, and he told us he'd kill all of us if we didn't insist she come back to meet us. The roads were abandoned, and the occasional car goes to the road, just passed by without slowing down. More likely, the people in the car were afraid of getting involved. The guys were clearly having fun, laughing while they punched and kicked us. With no help in sight, one of my cousins punches one of the guys and yells, "Run!" and we all instinctively run in different directions, leaving our motorcycles abandoned on the street. They start chasing us on foot at first. They went back, got on their motorcycles, and chased us through the streets. I didn't have a mobile phone with me, and I was unfamiliar with the area. I ran randomly looking for a hiding place, and I jumped a wall into a random person's house while the motorcycle drove on the road looking for us. I didn't know where the rest of my cousins were, especially the one who was bleeding badly. The house I jumped into was home to a huge dog who started barking at me, waking the owners. They obviously assumed I was there to rob them, but having one look at a 12-year-old boy in tears and clearly shaken, they asked me what happened, and I explained everything and told them I had no idea where my brothers were. They gave me a phone and I called the police, who said they would dispatch a patrol car and that we could expect it in no less than 2 hours. I had all my brothers' numbers memorized, but I didn't want to call them as I was afraid they may be hiding and a ringing cell phone would give their position away. I thanked the kind people who offered to host me until morning, but I had to get to my grandmother's place to find out if my cousins had made it back. I sneaked through the streets and finally found my grandparents' house. 2 of my cousins made it back, but my brother was still out there. Finally, he calls us and tells us that he's in hiding and will come back once the sun comes out, and there's generally a crowd outside. Until dawn, the motorcycles kept passing by our house, and we were afraid they'd followed one of us home. At dawn, my brother gets back, and I was the only one uninjured. One of my cousins needed stitches on his face, another broke his ribs, and my brother had a hairline fracture. We all ran through the night, and suddenly, all the strict impositions from our parents made sense. My brother called the cops too, and no one ever showed up. There was no support from anyone, and I can't imagine what would have happened if my female cousin was with us. We never even got a call back from the cops to ask if we were fine or anything. I can't imagine what would have happened if they'd have caught us. Needless to say, we never went out anywhere late at night for a long, long time. In the early 1990s, I used to work doing crime scene cleanup. I would attend all manner of things, from accidental deaths, suicides, fire deaths, explosions, homicides, unattended deaths, and pretty much any messed up situation that could happen inside of a home or structure. One of my first calls when I started doing this work was around 1993. It was a really rich, fancy home. The home was located in a very wealthy area of Los Angeles, up in the hills, and it was a huge home with a lot of land surrounding it. This was the first time I ever saw an elevator in a home. I never met the homeowners or actually any representative from the person who owned the home, as all the paperwork was done via fax. I think it was owned by an Asian family, but couldn't be 100% sure. I only thought this at the time due to the furnishings and things inside the home. It was pretty much emptied out, most of the personal contents prior to our arrival, so I didn't see any family pictures on the wall. It was huge, so big you could get lost inside. Up to this point, I have never been inside a multi-level home, much less one with so many bedrooms, game room, indoor pool, bar, dens, family rooms, basement, and I think a 6-car garage if I remember correctly. Anyway, we started work on this one late in the evening. It was once a crime scene, but by the time it was released to us, there were other damages that I couldn't explain. I assumed that the person was killed in the master bedroom, as there were some signs of trauma and some bullet holes in the bathroom shower and surrounding walls. There wasn't that much blood, as I think the person must have perished in the huge walk-in shower. What was odd was that I didn't know if the shooter turned on all the water faucets in the house, because there was water damage all through it, kind of like the Home Alone Wet Bandits stuff. There were areas where we had to remove wet drywall, wet carpet, baseboards, wood flooring, wet ceilings and cabinets. Since this was all over this huge house, and my crew at the time were just about 5 of us split up doing different areas. This house was so big that you couldn't hear each other from the different areas even if you were screaming. But we all carried these old Motorola walkie-talkies that allowed us to communicate from each other for miles. One of the issues we were dealing with was that in certain areas of the house the lights were off. I think prior to us coming out, an electrician shut off all the power in different areas because electrical components got wet. We all decided that using the elevator wouldn't be a good idea and just used the stairs and walked through the different areas of the home in complete darkness. We thought about using our generator, but the house was too big and there were too many rooms, so we just ran extension cords with lights to areas we needed, but it still didn't light up enough of the house. I remember 2 of our guys were working on the upstairs, maybe the 4th floor, where the murder actually took place. Another guy was working by himself in what appeared to be a bar/indoor nightclub area, removing wet cabinets and flooring. Another guy was working on this huge walk-in closet, tearing out wet carpet and drywall from floor to ceiling. I started working in a basement area, and there was some ceiling and walls that needed to be removed. This job was going to be an all-nighter, because of the vast and multiple areas that the damage was. Everything that we removed was damaged, and it was a long trek to remove it from the house and drive down to our trucks, adding to the time it took. So let's get to the creepy part. Imagine being in this huge home where a murder took place for one, but as we got through the night working, we began hearing and experiencing things. Our old radios would do a beep-beep chime when someone was about to say something over the air. Since it was only our company that had these radios, it wasn't random interference from outside sources, and we hadn't experienced such things before. But as the night went on, and we were working, we kept getting alerts that someone was about to talk. So I and others would drop what we were doing and listen for a bip, like someone was going to say something but no one spoke. Maybe one of the guys was fooling with the radio. As I was making my way with a trash can full of debris out of the basement, as I didn't want to take my trash too heavy to carry out, I made several loads It was a summer night, so getting out in the cool summer air was a benefit. One of these trips, I had to go up the stairs from the basement and down a long hallway. I believe to my right was an opening to a large living room type room, and to my left were some windows to the outside. But further down was the door that I needed to take to the exit and take my debris out. On one of the last trips, the light went out. I got some light from the moon outside, but to my right the rest of the house seemed unnaturally dark. As I make my way back to the truck, I grabbed a small flashlight in case it happened again. After a while of working in the basement area, one of my guys comes up to me and starts chatting. I can tell he's nervous, and he starts on me saying, "Wouldn't it be better if we worked together? That way we can finish up areas quicker." I could tell he didn't want to be by himself, so I agreed, and I honestly knew how he felt. It was about 1 a.m., and we decided to take a break and meet in the pool table room and eat. We started exchanging stories about the place, mostly on how cool it was, but also creepy. We all experienced random whole sections of the house losing power, only for it to come back on again in a different section. The guys that were on the upstairs part talked about hearing music but couldn't find the source. I asked who the dumbass was who kept hitting the talk button. No one did. We started coming to the realization the job wasn't going to be completed tonight, and it would be a 2 to 3 day job. We talked about our options, and one of them was, since it was nearly 2 at that point, was that we should work a few more hours, sleep there, go up and get showered and go back to the office. I, for one, wasn't into the idea of sleeping in that house, and overruled, and said we'll work a couple more hours and call it a day. The following day we already had another job on the books, so we got home and rested a little, then back at it. We got back to the big fancy house at 3 p.m. and decided to work as long as we could and finishing up the following day. That evening we sent one of the guys for pizza and kept working so there would be 2 of us paired, and when the pizza came, we would break and eat up and then rest back to it. After we ate our dinner, and once again back in the pool table room, we're just relaxing as the work and distances in the house are taking a toll on us. We decide the best case, so none of us gets too tired lugging the trash. We would split that duty, that one guy would go, and then the other guy would go, and so on. Almost everyone hears music playing at some point in the house. I heard it walking down from the kitchen area to the long hallway, but it sounded like it was coming from another location in the house. Another guy heard it coming from upstairs in the master bedroom area, but when you got up there, it sounded like it was coming from elsewhere. One of our guys called us over the radio as he was making his way back from debris out to the trucks, and asked if someone was over in the kitchen pantry room. We all say no and ask why. He said the door is open and it wasn't before. We joked that he was just probably hungry. It was around midnight at this point, and I was working one of the extra bedrooms that had its own private bathroom. This area was also down a long hallway that had a few other rooms and ended in a den type area. I was with one of my guys, and we both jumped as we heard a loud bang. It sounded like something big and flat hit the ground, kind of like if you knocked over a large piece of furniture, and I got on the radio and checked on my guys thinking they broke something, and everyone said no, they hadn't broken anything, and no one else heard it. My coworker and I sure did, so we go down the hallway and look around. Maybe a picture fell off the wall or something, but there's nothing. On one of the last trips from that area, my coworker took the debris to the truck, and I was left alone in the waiting room for him to return, and the lights go out. I'm sitting here in this room, in the dark, alone, in the waiting room for him to return. All down the hallway is pitch black for some reason. There's not even enough light from the moon. He took our flashlight with him, and I start making my way out of the room down to the den area that led to a larger open room, from there to a living room and dining room, then onto a kitchen, and I start to see light from the pool table room. So I start to make my way over there, and then those lights go out. I get on my radio and call out that all the lights on the second floor were out, and I start to hear someone walking towards me, coming from the living room area, and thinking it was a co-worker, I call out to him but get no reply. I stood there in silence. Then I start to see a flashlight moving around, and it's another co-worker. He said that in his area the lights were on, and he heard me yelling for him. I didn't yell. I'd only called on the radio. Just as we were talking, the lights came back on. My co-worker with the trash can and the flashlight comes back in. The last and final day we go out to finish, I cancelled our schedule so that we could finish the job in the light of day. No more evenings or middle of the night work in that house. After we were done, we started exchanging stories about it, and one of the guys swears he heard me yell for him. I promise I didn't because I was frozen. The lights turning off and on were everywhere. It didn't feel like it was an electrical issue, more like someone was messing with us. One guy said he went to use one of the only functioning restrooms and saw someone walk by when he opened the door, and it wasn't any of us. One of our guys claimed he heard footsteps in another room. We all heard the music, and one thing about the music is we all heard different type. I heard what sounded like classical or Chopin. Others said it sounded like country music, but he couldn't make out any of the lyrics. And yet another heard what sounded like mariachi music. We were all very confused as to the events of those days. I drove an old SUV back in college. After school I drove home, which is about a half-hour drive away. I was getting dressed to come home when the car alarm went off, so I rushed out and discovered the car door open with the radio head unit and speakers gone. I was thinking, this guy works fast. Reported it to the police, and after a few weeks they found the thief and asked me to go to the police station. At the police station, I was asked a few questions, and the officer told me I had to hear something from the thief. When I confronted him, he told me that he was able to get into my car at the car park near my school, and that I unexpectedly arrived, so he dove and lied flat in the third row. So I was driving home with an unknown passenger all the time. When I arrived home and locked the car, he removed the items, and when he opened the door, that's when the alarm triggered. The best part is what happened at the police station, because a bunch of the cops were waiting to see my reaction. He said he was scared witless. He was just a regular car thief. His concern was that I would be bringing him far away and he wouldn't be able to get home. Since he was just an amateur thief, when he opened the door and triggered the alarm, he panicked and left some of his belongings, which were used by the police to identify him. In any case, I hope to never see him again. It was my 6th birthday, and my party had just ended. We had cake, pizza, and played games. Typical American birthday party. I lived with my mom and her boyfriend. His name was Steve, and for my birthday, they got me one of those plastic Fisher-Price playsets. The ones that were like 4 feet tall and had a small slide, small enough to fit in my room. I was extremely excited about this because it was exactly what I wanted, and I was sure it was the greatest invention since sliced bread. The playset was set up right by my door in front of my bed. Now, before I go on to the actual part of the story you want to hear, I need to give you a little bit of background about the house I lived in, from what I know at least. To begin with, the house was an old blue colonial house in upstate New York. The house was like every other house in the neighborhood, and since Steve had just got a promotion at work, there was constantly work being done on the house. Basically, a complete remodel while we lived there. The only thing I didn't like about the house was that you couldn't get into the attic, and for some reason, bats kept getting in there, and at 6 years old, You don't like bats. My mum tucked me into bed after my birthday at around 9 p.m, a little later than usual, and I remember waking up a few times that night because I was really excited to use the playset in the morning. I didn't get to play with it much that day because of the assembly. One of the times I woke up, I remember looking at the playset when I saw two shadows, a boy and a girl, and they looked like they were talking to each other. As a child, I didn't want to be scared, so I rationalized this as the shadows of the trees playing tricks on my mind. That's what my mum would have said. I managed to get back to sleep that night and didn't really think much of it the next day. My birthday's in June, so I usually didn't have class on my birthday. This meant I could spend the day playing with my friends. I didn't think about the shadows I saw the night before at all. I basically forgot what happened until the next night. My usual bedtime was 8 p.m, and my mum was pretty strict on this matter, so I showered, got dressed, and was in bed. I was lying in bed when I had a strong feeling something was watching me. I looked to the wall between my door and the playset, and the shadows were there again. This time, I paid more attention to it while I was frozen in fear in my bed. The shadow children seemed to be talking, but I still couldn't hear them. It also seemed as if they were looking at each other, but it's hard to sense 3D direction from a 2D shadow. I screamed for my mum, and she ran into my room and turned my light on. At that point, the shadows disappeared. My mum then let me sleep in her bed that night, which she never let me do. She assumed I'd had a nightmare. Every night from then on, when I would look at the wall at night, those shadows would be there. When this would happen, I would call for my mum and the cycle would repeat. During this time, Steve and my mum would argue a lot. I wasn't sure why, but I know I didn't notice it at first. The house had also gone into some full remodeling, where almost half of the house would always have something being done to it. I wished for school. This was back when school was fun and all your friends would be there, and I hated spending any time in the house and would try to go to my grandma's whenever possible. This cycle repeated for a while, and I'm not really sure what my mum thought about me telling her that ghost shadow people were in my room every night. I begged her to leave the hallway light on every night, hoping that the light would scare away the shadows. She obliged, but the light never did anything, and I would yell for her every night. This continued for a while, but then one night something changed. Laying in bed, something felt different. I wasn't sure if I had built up some sort of tolerance to the shadow people that were in my room at night, in the same place, doing nothing but silently talking to each other, or if I was just being dumb. That night, I decided I didn't want to wake my mum up for some reason. I decided I would be brave enough to walk right past the shadows to my mum's room. I think it might be important to remember that whenever my mum would come by these shadows, they would disappear. I still don't know why. I walked past the shadows and nothing happened. I was then in the hallway when the light was right above me and my mum's room was to my left. I remember looking up at the light and then back at my mum's room and then back at the light. I did this a few times, and then I remember just staring into the light. I'm not sure why, but I was drawn to it. After looking for the light for some reason, I decided I didn't want to wake up my mum, which was weird because I never cared before. I went back into bed, and the next thing I remember is sitting in the living room watching TV. There was construction all around me, and plastic covers on the couches, so that none of the drywall or new paint got on them. I remember I was sitting on the floor, and I was just watching static on the TV. To me, this memory seems like an out-of-body experience, like I wasn't even in control. These memories are like a flash to me, and I have nothing in between. I only have some more memory of being in that house. I was in my room, looking over my window down to the driveway. It was nighttime, and my mum had asked her friend's mother to come over. Her name was Danielle, but everyone called her Dee. I also remember watching her pull out of the driveway and giving my mum a hug. I could hear them for some reason, and this also seemed like an out-of-body experience. I hear Dee say there was a boy and girl spirit in the house, But they weren't the problem. The problem was there was a dark and malicious entity that wanted me. Dee and my mum then proceeded to burn sage in the house. I assumed I went to bed, but when I woke up I was at my grandma's house, and it was many days after the light incident. I felt fine when I woke up, and I didn't even notice anything different. I often spent the night at my grandma's house. I had my own assumptions about what happened, but I never really talked to my mum about it until I was 16. When I woke up at my grandma's, my mum told me that we were moving out of Steve's house, and they were breaking up and that I wouldn't be going back. My mum would collect my things. So, as I stated earlier, I spoke to my mum about this in detail when I was older. The memories had bothered me for so long, and I wanted answers. I told my mum the exact story that I've just told you, and my mum gave me a confused look when I told her about the part with Dee. She told me I wasn't in the house. My mum proceeds to tell me how I became more and more distant as we lived in the house. Then one day we were eating dinner and I just passed out, head in plate like out of a movie. My mum said I had a high fever and looked ill. My mum's the kind of person who believes in the supernatural, and I think when I passed out she decided to accept the ghost stories I was telling her weren't in my head. This is when she decides to call Dee, who was known around town as being a psychic. Dee told my mum immediately to get me out the house, and she would come over. My mum drove me to my grandma's and went back to the house when Dee showed up. I wasn't in the house, but was somehow able to recall what Dee had done, without my mother ever telling me. My mother also told me she didn't tell Dee anything about what I had just said, and that I had just mentioned there was something here. Since I was sick, my grandma kept a close eye on me all night. My grandma doesn't really believe in ghosts, but when I talked to her, she said it was a strange night. I was having trouble sleeping and had a high fever, but then it just stopped. Like one moment all of my symptoms went away. I went to bed, and that's when I remember waking up. And as I share this story with you now, I'm a 21-year-old senior in college. Every so often I think back to these events and I'm just confused. I have no answers. I try to come up with my own conclusion, but I could never think of a rational one. I have a hypothesis for what happened, but I won't share that with you now. I want you to come to your own conclusion. Maybe someone else has gone through the same type of thing. That was the point of sharing this. I'm hoping someday someone will hear this and be able to help me. It would be easy to say I was possessed or something, but it seems too unreal. If the memories I have weren't so vivid, it would be hard for me to believe this story. I mean, hell, it's hard to believe with the memories I have. But I can assure you, this happened. I was staying at a charming B&B that had once been the lavish mansion of a lumber baron dating back to the early 20th century. My room was located on the ground floor, originally serving as a parlor or library for the esteemed owners. The current owners of the B&B, a warm and friendly retired couple, took great care of the place. However, there was an air of history and mystery that lingered within its walls. One night as I slumbered peacefully, I suddenly awoke with a start, overcome by a distinct sensation of someone firmly gripping my ankle. It felt as though a hand had wrapped itself around my leg. Startled and shaken, I swiftly leapt out of bed, frantically switched on the lights, and to my surprise, there was no one else in the room. I found myself alone in the early hours of the morning, feeling a mixture of confusion and unease, convinced that sleep would elude me for the remainder of the night. I decided to make my way to the kitchen, and patiently awaited the awakening of the household. At around 4:45, just as the first rays were peering down through the windows, the telephone rang, and the answering machine picked up the call. It was the voice of the mother, who was in hospice care nearby, urgently requesting her daughter's presence. The B&B owner's apartment was located at the rear of the building, and they would not have heard the phone ring, as the call had come through the B&B's public number, separate from their private line. Realizing the significance of the call, I knocked on their door, rousing them from their sleep, and informed them that an important message awaited their attention. Without delay, their daughter rushed off to be with her mother, who was simply feeling lonely and seeking companionship. Tragically, the mother passed away not long after my departure. When the family gathered, at the B&B to reminisce about the beloved matriarch, a wave of laughter erupted as they shared amusing stories that had brought joy to their lives. Suddenly, in the midst of the laughter, a wire wall art sculpture hanging on the wall began to jangle and vibrate, as if someone were gently strumming it. The B&B owners recounted this eerie incident to me during my subsequent visit, and from that point forward, I made it a point to stay exclusively in the upstairs rooms, allowing the spirit of the mansion to rest undisturbed in its past, preserving the memories and stories that were woven into its very foundation. This happened around 16 years ago. We had gotten a dog a few years earlier, after someone broke into our house in broad daylight, and it fell to me to walk her in the mornings, afternoons, and night. One night as I was walking her on a street a few blocks away, we passed an SUV stopped on the side of the road. His driver was shining a spotlight on a second-floor window of someone's house. It struck me as odd, but there wasn't anything I could do about it, so I kept walking. At the end of the block, out of habit, I checked for oncoming cars or pedestrians and noticed the SUV had moved. The dog and I turned left and kept walking. Now I like my city, and it's a nice place to live, but I'm not under any illusions. I've been propositioned more than once by sex workers while I've been out with the dog, and one night I heard someone screaming like a damned soul inside an abandoned building. City life is great, but it carries a few risks, and the city harbors a few predators. The dog and I turn into another block, and a few minutes later, guess what showed up again? Maybe I'm paranoid. The results of all the police reports I've read as a news reporter, but I had the feeling that I was being followed. I had no cell phone to call for help. It was well after midnight, and the only help I had was a dog who was pushing 12 when we got her. Another turn, another block, and halfway down, I see the lights of an SUV coming around the corner behind me again. It was late, and I was tired, but there was no way in hell I was walking to my house or someone was playing cat and mouse with me. I turned the corner. Out of the corner of my block, there's a bar with a parking lot that goes around the building in an L-turn that goes away from the road, and I was walking onto the one I live on. I got to the bar, ducked into the lot, and stood against the wall with my dog. Sure enough, the SUV drove past the bar and turned right at the corner. I watched as they drove slowly past, and then waited another 5 to 10 minutes in the darkness with my dog in case they decided to make another pass. But they didn't. The dog and I went home, went inside and left the lights off as I got ready for bed. To this day I don't know what the driver of the SUV was doing, why they were shining a spotlight on someone's bedroom window, and why they decided to follow me, or what connection might exist between these two things. I love the city I live in, but I have 3 children, and don't like any of them being out late at night, not even with our new dog. I'm not terribly fanciful. Neither is my dad. When my siblings and I were little, we all thought we saw a ghost in my sister's room after recently moving into the house. We were all younger than 7 at the time. My sister always felt ill at ease in the room, to the point she cried whenever my parents made her sleep in her own room for many years. She specifically remembers one time when she was sleeping, and then someone, who she thought was my dad, carrying her downstairs and putting her in the living room armchair. She specifically remembers that she kind of woke up and was angry that my dad brought her downstairs. She woke up in the chair the next morning by my dad, who asked me why she was sleeping downstairs and said he never brought her downstairs. As far as ghost origin, the house is old, so there could be stories we don't know. We knew there was a Native American tribe in the area, and we know the house used to be on an orchard. We also know in the 70s, a resident of the house left angry after a fight, zoomed his car down the driveway, went over the curb, and hit and killed a young boy across the street who was playing on one of those toy fake lawnmowers. We also know the house was built in the 1870s, and when my parents renovated the upstairs bathroom, They found a letter that was sent to the local church nailed inside the wall. My parents have that letter framed at the house. This event happened yesterday. My mum and dad were home, and my dad was in the attic. He went down to the second floor and into my parents' room. When he saw a movement move on the other side of the room that leads to the hallway of my sister's room. It was a figure, in what he thought was my mum's pajamas, go from my sister's room area to my brother's room/bathroom, right in the hallway. He called my mum's name, nothing. So we went and checked out the hallway, then heard my mum downstairs. He did not see anything in any of the rooms. He went downstairs and my mum said he looked visibly spooked. The scariest part of this story for me is that it happened to my dad, who is not one for striking fancies, and he swears he saw something move, wearing some sort of pattern, move across in his line of vision. This happened around 7 years ago. At the time I worked in a job that was about a 45-minute drive away on a good day. It was a drive along little country roads to get to this isolated country town. But the pay was good, and the benefits worked for me. Each night on my way home, I would drive down the main street of the town to an intersection, turning right to head home. This one night, I drove down to this intersection and waited for the lights to turn, when suddenly and unexpectedly, I hear a rap on my passenger window. I turned to see these two men staring at me through the window of their car, both kind of scruffy, the driver looking really angry. Wondering what was going on, I lowered my window. The driver didn't even let me talk. "Why'd you cut me off back there?" I was confused, not having seen another car when I pulled out. I didn't. He looked even more angry at my denial. "Yes, you did. Back on Turnpike Lane, we nearly crashed." I didn't come down Turnpike Lane. I was in the parking area at the top of the street and turned down from another road. It must have been someone with a similar car, as my car has a very distinctive color, but I've seen a few like it around. "You're a liar. Don't believe you." At this point, he was getting redder and redder, and his friend chips in. "Why are you so nervous if it ain't you?" "'Cause your friend looks really angry and I have an anxiety disorder. Plus, you're two men accosting a young woman on her own." At this point, there's a beep from behind me. We're holding up traffic. I pull off, ignoring a roar from him. However, as I was driving, I heard a prolonged beep from behind me and saw him following me in the mirror. He must have cut into my lane to follow me. I began to become really frightened as they followed me towards a main road. Wondering what I should do, a set of traffic lights turned red ahead of me, and I slowed, panicking. I quickly locked my doors in case, but the next thing I knew, he was pounding on my car door in an attempt to open it. I don't remember any of this, but I found out after that he had some sort of hammer in his hands, and he broke my car window, attempted to pull me out of the car by my hair, and hitting me once when he couldn't get me out. I think he must have knocked me out, because the next thing I know, a couple was checking my pulse and trying to stem the bleeding from a cut on my forehead. Apparently, this couple saw him pulling out past me, nearly colliding with the traffic light. In the end, he was caught. He pleaded not guilty in court, and I had to take the stand. It was proven via CCTV footage that I wasn't the driver he nearly collided with. He is in jail still, all over road rage and a case of mistaken identity. My wife, a long time ago, used to have night terrors. Some of it may have been due to the fact that she grew up in a legit haunted house. I can testify that stuff went on in her house. Anyhow, her father also owned a turn-of-the-century piano made in 1910. And her mother has all kinds of antique stuff from where her family came to New Mexico in the 1800s. Needless to say, things could have been happening in her house because of all that stuff, or for the fact the previous owner decided to no longer live anymore and took his own life in the basement with exhaust. Well, as time went by, her night terrors continued to get worse, so her mum decided to use the Guatemalan worry dolls and try and help. The premise of the Guatemalan worry dolls is to put them under your pillow and sleep. Afterwards, you place them in a box and bury them on a path you will never go on again. It worked. However, fast forward to right before my daughter was born, my wife and I rented a beautiful house on the hill overlooking the town. About 6 months into living in the house while cleaning, these Guatemalan worry dolls start showing up in random places. Thresholds of the house, old nooks and crannies, and we weren't entirely sure where they were coming from. Well, my daughter was born and remained in the house for another 6 months or so. But as we were moving and cleaning out the house, more dolls kept showing up. We packed them all away, and my wife forgot where she put them. As we were moving into a new house, not 2 or 3 days in the threshold of the front of the house, there was a Guatemalan worry doll laying right there. We'd get rid of old couches and bring in new ones in, and sure enough, lift the couch cushions and voila, worry doll. For a long time, I believed the piano held something in it because we brought it with us to the new house, and stuff would always happen. Never in front of me, but definitely behind me, but always in front of my wife or her friends. Lights inadvertently turning on, picture frames swinging on the walls and falling to the ground, some really funky stuff. I started accepting what was happening when it was in my children's rooms. That got on my nerves. I'd come home when no one else was here and sternly tell whatever it was that it wasn't welcome, reciting the Lord's Prayer in step. We eventually moved the piano out, and a lot of things stopped. However, we were telling one of my wife's friends who is very sensitive to this kind of stuff. She was really creeped out, but about 3 days after she left, she was cleaning out her car and called my wife frantically saying, "This is messed up, you're messing with me." My wife was confused as hell. You guessed it. She found a worry doll in her center console. Most recently, my wife found one. The scariest thing to happen was the time my wife and I were stoned watching a Netflix comedy special for John Mulaney. A caption came on telling my wife she was going to die. I thought it was a caption saying like when John Mulaney was born, so I didn't even look at what it said. But later on, my wife told me what it said. I don't know what to do at this point. Honestly, I'd just like to be free of these cursed dolls. During our visit to the historic Columns Hotel in New Orleans, my mother, girlfriend, and I stayed in a room to immerse ourselves in the vibrant atmosphere of Mardi Gras. As we settled in for the night, my mother decided to wake up early to catch the parade route, leaving my girlfriend and I in the room. With limited sleeping arrangements, I opted to sleep on the floor, while my girlfriend and mother occupied the beds. As the night progressed, something peculiar happened. My girlfriend turned to me and asked if I had touched her during the night. Both of us were certain that my mother hadn't done so either. Confused, I reassured her that neither of us had made any physical contact. She proceeded to recount an unnerving experience. She had felt a hand stroking up the side of her leg, reaching all the way to her crotch. What made it even more perplexing was the fact that the covers hadn't shifted or moved, ruling out the possibility that either of us had been the cause of this unsettling situation. This encounter left us questioning the nature of the room and the presence we felt within it. The historic ambience of the Columns Hotel took a more mysterious and enigmatic aura, making us wonder if there was otherworldly forces at play during our stay. I was walking home from work at 1 a.m. down the back alleys of a notoriously seedy area in London, behind the 24-hour clubs full of meth heads on 72-hour weekend benders. A brand new black Land Rover pulled up to me. The passenger window came down and some guy asked if I could dance. I know, right? I laughed and said no. He said something to the driver and they crawled me. He told me that there was a dancing competition he could take me to if I wanted to make some money. I said no and kept walking. The car stopped and allowed me to get maybe 20 meters ahead, but the car came back up pretty fast. This time the driver wound down the window and told me to get into the car, otherwise something bad would happen. I ran, and the car chased me. I mean, screeching tires like a bad 80s movie. Luckily, I knew the area like the back of my hand and did a couple of nifty turns through some alleys the car couldn't get down. I lived nearby and managed to get home just fine. My boyfriend was waiting up for me, and I just walked into the house as if nothing happened. I don't know why I didn't say anything. It just sounded like I might have been overreacting. In hindsight, I'm sure they were just some little meth heads twinking pouring out the club. I'm also certain the person in the back of the car was someone notable. The car was out of place and swanky, and the guy driving was clearly a driver. There's a whole sleaze world out there, coexisting and going under the radar, and I'd rather not be a part of it. My great-grandfather, great-grandmother, their 4 kids and dog moved into this old farmhouse in rural central Illinois. I never personally encountered the farmhouse, as all of this occurred in the late 70s. Here are the real, terrifying encounters my family members had in this house. When they first moved in, a woman came up to them at the grocery store. She told them that their dog would die, and the house was evil, and that bad things would happen to them. Basically some Amityville horror kind of stuff. They brushed it off, and thought she was just trying to scare them because she wanted the house. Note, my great-grandma had a previous husband whom she had 5 of her 6 kids with. Only 4 of those kids ever lived in the farmhouse. My grandma, my great-grandma's daughter and 4th child, was the result of an affair with the great-grandpa who's in this story. That's a whole different story, but the bloodline thing is crucial to the story. After the lady had told them all of the things that would happen to them, every single thing happened. They honestly thought she was a witch who cursed them because of how accurate she was on what would happen. Not long after they moved in, their dog died from being hit by a car. After that, my great-grandpa turned mean. So mean all the kids hated him, even some of the adults. He went crazy. My grandma wouldn't leave the house. It's as if it had a gravitational pull on her. They believed that my great-grandpa and grandma were possessed by the house. My Aunt Carrie, the youngest child, swears up and down she saw Dracula in the house. To elaborate, all of the adults were playing cards downstairs. My aunt was younger at the time and was playing near the hallway. When she looked up, she saw what she described as Dracula looking back at her. She was hysterical. My great-grandpa actually had to slap her in the face just so that she would calm down. No surprise they didn't believe her. Another incident is when my great-grandpa yelled for all the kids to come downstairs. I guess there was a door that led to the 2nd floor stairs that you entered and exited out of. The kids couldn't find the door. It vanished. My great-grandpa was getting impatient and yelling at them. He couldn't hear them at all. They said they were on the other side shouting, and they couldn't find the door. Something else similar happened to my great-grandma's niece. She'd gone upstairs and walked past where she thought the kids were playing. They were being so loud, she opened and stood at the doorway and went to yell at them. But of course there was no one there. I know, how cliché. But when she went downstairs and described to my great-grandparents which room and door, they told her, "There's no room there. It's a door that leads to the outside. It's all boarded up, so there's no way you could have opened it." So if she actually had have opened the door and tried to walk through the room, she would have fallen from the 2nd story of the house. She was so freaked out that she left and never came back after that. She swore there was a room and door there. The house obviously liked to play with your mind. My uncle took a picture outside the house with his hands and kind of posed. When he got them back from the developer, they said they needed to show him something. In the proof of the pictures, His posed hands were being held down by something. I wish I could find the picture to add to this. Here's where more bloodlines come in. My great-grandma's ex-husband and baby daddy married her new husband's daughter and had 2 children. So it was a messed up family circle. Since they were all intertwined, my grandma's ex-husband / step-son-in-law and stepdaughter / her kid's stepmom / stepsister would stay with them sometimes. The first and last time they stayed in the house was when they were asleep on the 2nd floor. Some family were downstairs playing cards when they heard a bed squeaking violently. Now, you know what they thought when that was happening, and they were a little disturbed. They tried to ignore it, but it was non-stop. One of the adults went to tell the ex-husband and his new wife to keep it down. When they knocked and there was no answer, the adult reluctantly opened the door, and the ex-husband and his new wife were sound asleep and fully clothed. The next morning, when the ex and new wife were told about what happened, they slept in their camper for the rest of their visit. There was also this recurring red spot that no matter how much you scrubbed it, it would always come back. I'm sure there's much more stuff, but these are the most recurring things I've heard. Unfortunately, the only person who could tell you anything she's experienced in that house was my grandma, who has since passed on. Years later, they found out that my great-grandma's oldest daughter's husband's uncle actually took his own life in the basement. He had done that years before they moved in. My family only stayed there because they were not financially stable enough to leave, and after they finally moved out, a new family moved in. The new family stayed there for a week, and stayed in their RV for the rest of the time till they could find a new house. After that family moved, the farmhouse burnt down. I'm not really sure if the house caught on fire or if it was burnt down on purpose. I've drove past where it was located many times. It's all cornfield now. The old grain silos that sat with it are still there, but that's all. I'll wonder what happened to make the farmhouse so evil. This was around 12 years ago. My husband's family has a mountain house across the state. Once we get off the turnpike, we take a single country road up over a mountain and down the other side of our house. It's about a half-hour ride on this winding mountain road. In the middle section near the top of the mountain, it is the most winding part, and the word slow is written across the road in giant letters. We take this road maybe 6 to 10 times a year and back. I'd been up the house dozens of times at this point, and nothing odd happened in the trip, up until this one time. My husband was driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and there were no other people in the car. There's a Billy Joel song playing in the iPod through the car speakers. I think it was Uptown Girl. There is no radio reception anywhere near this remote mountain, and as we approach the area where slow is written across the road, a man's voice, not Billy Joel's, comes through the car speaker and says in this deep, creepy-ass voice, "Slow down." The words were not in that song. My husband and I look at each other like, oh my god, did you hear that? We have no idea where it came from, since there are no houses or anything on this side of the mountain, and we didn't pass any other cars on the way down. But we do laugh about it, and bring it up every once in a while when we go up the mountain and see the words slow on the pavement. It's never happened again in the hundreds of trips we've made since that night. On Memorial Day 2021, about 2 years ago, I was at an Airbnb with some friends in Iowa. On that trip, I was sitting in a hot tub at night and saw, as vividly as the person sitting next to me, an old man in a button-up shirt standing underneath the deck we were near, looking at us. I asked the 6 people I was with if they could see him, as I was shocked, and they each said no. I freaked out and sprinted inside. They all thought I was crazy, so did I. until I saw him briefly near the woods by the house a few hours later. I haven't seen him since, but some weird stuff's been happening. Shortly after that trip, I had a jar of olives that somehow lost all of their juice overnight. I enjoy the occasional martini, which is why I noticed. There was also a morning where my bathroom sink was running when I woke up. The sink that was running was the faucet that I never turn on in a double vanity in an apartment. Shortly after my wife and I moved apartments, nothing to do with that, just happened to move. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for about 8 months. Then, one night, a glass on her nightstand started spinning, like someone had knocked it into a spin. We tried to recreate it with pillows, knocking it over, bumping it, but we couldn't do it. We moved places again into our new home about a month ago. Within the first week of moving, we had a spoon knocked off the counter. Tonight, we had the weirdest experience apart from the ghost I saw this far. We were on our deck, and our basement light turned on by itself. The light is only able to turn on via one switch, and it is not on a timer. After confirming that there was no way me or my wife could have turned it on, I started to clear out the house to make sure no one was in it. When I got to our garage, I was looking in my wife's trunk. I closed the door, turned to my car and looked in the window, and my car alarm went off. I was still about 5 feet away from it, and there were no loud noises and my keys were upstairs. My alarm had never gone off like that, let alone without anything causing it. At this point, I freaked out beyond belief. If anyone has any idea what this could be or how to deal with it, I'd be extremely grateful. It feels like whatever this is following me, as I've had very few experiences like this, to the point in my life outside of the occasional bump in the attic when I was younger. Moving is definitely not an option, as I'm in my dream home that we just purchased. When I was around 18 or 19, a group of friends and I decided to explore an abandoned hotel located near the seafront of my hometown. The hotel had been dormant since the 90s when a fire had ravaged the top floor. The only way to enter the building was through a broken window that led into a kitchen. As we entered, we were greeted by a scene of complete destruction. The kitchen appeared as though it had been trashed, with debris scattered everywhere. But undeterred by the chaos, we made our way to the main reception area, where the walls were covered with graffiti and doodles. While exploring, my friends and I descended into the basement, where we spotted a few orbs hovering in the darkness. Although it could have been dust or some other mundane explanation, they seemed larger and more distinct to me. Intrigued, we continued on with our exploration. As we approached the first floor, we encountered a door adorned with spray-painted pentagrams and nails protruding from the door frames. Initially finding it peculiar, we brushed it off and continued our adventure. My best friend's girlfriend and I decided to venture to the 4th floor, where the fire had originated. The room that bore the worst of the damage left an eerie impression on us, and to our surprise we saw a figure standing in the room, sending shivers down our spine. Feeling unnerved, we quickly fled to the 3rd floor. But that night something unusual happened. I dreamt about the figure I had seen earlier, its face vividly imprinted in my mind. Although I didn't believe in the supernatural, the experience left me deeply unsettled. Later, as we headed downstairs to what would be the bar area to smoke some devil's lettuce, we discovered that the door previously nailed shut had been mysteriously opened. We hadn't noticed anyone entering or exiting the building, and curiosity got the better of us and we cautiously peered in. Our eyes fell upon a half-burned doll with the words, "I'm watching you," scrawled on the wall. It sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. As we sat in a booth trying to process what we had just witnessed, my brother, who shared my skepticism about the supernatural, suddenly mentioned seeing a woman in the corner. I looked up towards the door and saw a woman with long black hair and a pale face, her eyes fixated on us from the top of the doorway. Filled with a mix of fear and curiosity, I reached for my phone to capture the haunting image, but as soon as I grabbed it, she vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, I returned to the hotel, but nothing out of the ordinary occurred. The entire experience will stay with me for the rest of my days as one of the most disturbing I have ever lived through. A few years ago, I was walking on the street going back home after my dental appointment, and there's this big car with the doors and trunk open. Two guys are standing next to it. One is closer to the driver door, and the other one is holding some boxes next to the trunk. He's holding 4 to 5 boxes, but they don't seem heavy. As I walk next to the car to catch the bus, the guy with the boxes tells me, "Hey, can you come and help me put these boxes in the car?" I realized he was a foreigner, and I said, "Sorry, no, I'm in a hurry." And both of them yell out, "Come on, help us." I was thinking why won't the other guy help him? Why is the car with the doors open? I tell him no, and they ask again, and I walked away quickly. I didn't think it was a big deal right after, but when I was telling the story to my friends, I realized they were probably trying to kidnap someone, and my brain knew before my consciousness. Now, years later, I've heard some stories similar to this one, and the guys end up kidnapping girls for sex trafficking. This wasn't very popular until recently, so some people thought I was exaggerating, but there you go. My boyfriend had a haunted bed-sit flat. Everything, including the kitchen area and bed/lounge, was in one room. He used to go home from work to all the cooker rings on full blast or being woken by the iron cord and plug swinging violently on the wall bracket. The TV also blew up when we were watching it, and one night it was the final nail in the coffin when he was getting off to sleep and the cutlery drawer in the kitchen was pulled out from under the sink so quickly the entire contents were thrown all over the floor. Safe to say, he no longer makes that his residence. 2 years ago, when my autistic daughter had trouble sleeping at night, she was 1.5 at the time, I would place her in the car seat and drive her around. It was the only way she'd fall asleep soundly, and I lived with my parents in a nice neighborhood. So one night I'm driving, and my girl had finally fallen asleep. It's 9 p.m. at this point, so I'm hungry and want to let her fall into a deeper sleep so that I can move her. I get some food from a drive-thru and pull over on a side street right next to the restaurant so that I can eat. I'm finishing eating and look back to check on my kid, and suddenly, these super bright headlights pull up behind me a little too close. I wave apologetically, assuming whoever it is trying to park at the house I'm currently in front of. So I pull away and start going down the street, and once I'm at the end of a few blocks and around the corner, I see the headlights again. No biggie, this is a semi-busy side street, so people cut down this way all the time. Only this person is riding my ass like I'm not moving fast enough, and I get annoyed and change lanes to get out of their way. Almost as soon as I do, they follow. At this point I realize that the car is the same sedan that had pulled up behind me on the last street. But now they are too close for me to see the make of the car, and the high beams are on, so I can't see anything behind me. I curse myself for not paying better attention to the car before. I didn't want to be crazy paranoid, so I took a few unnecessary side streets and passed my neighborhood, only for this person to be behind me turn for turn and lane change for lane change. So I panicked and called my dad. I know I should have called the police, but I was 21 and did the first thing I could think of. He was at work half an hour away. He has terrible reception and decides to call me back on the landline at his work, and is on his cell phone with the sheriff's department for our neighborhood, and they tell me to drive to the station. It's been close to 40 minutes since the person had started following me and kept riding me closer and closer. I'm running lights and swerving around at this point trying to catch someone's attention. So I drive to the station, and no one is there. Not a car, not a cruiser, no one in the department office, not even any cars in the small parking lot. and they want me to pull into the lot and wait for an officer. I'm alone, and my 1-year-old is now fussing in the back seat, and there is only one way in and out of the parking lot. I note past the station and tell my dad to tell the officer that there's no one there. I see a sheriff's car at the light ahead and start to honk and flash my lights as he drives across the intersection. I am driving too. He either misses what I'm doing or ignores it. It's now been a little over an hour, and the person has tapped my arse 4 times. Eventually, I saw another sheriff's car and just laid on my horn, and I think he caught on because he busted a U-turn and came back towards us. As he did, the car behind me disappeared into the mall across the street and the officer followed. I was instructed to go back to the station and did so, and eventually, I was waiting for so long, I went inside, triple locking the door of my car because I was terrified. The office had no one except an emergency phone on the desk, and that one only connected me to another extension. To wrap the story up, they made me feel crazy and said they never found the car, and that all they could do was make a statement since technically nothing happened. And he offered to follow me and my daughter home, only to drive away as soon as I parked, while I was left to take my sleeping kid inside, shaking so hard I couldn't unlock the door. I ran upstairs to my mum's room. She was on pain medication after a surgical procedure, so she was asleep. And I shake her awake, sobbing, and tell her what happened. It took me 2 days to sleep again at night, and to this day I refuse to do night drives with my daughter. My cousin Alan passed away at a very young age in 2014. He was only 18 when it happened, and I was 10 at the time, so I didn't quite understand, yet I knew he was no longer with us. He died in a very tragic car accident while not wearing his seatbelt, and his head became mangled in the steering wheel. There were 2 other people in the car who were wearing seatbelts and survived. Please wear your seatbelts, people. Just to preface, this was on New Year's Eve. He ended up in the ICU while the other passengers had full recoveries. He ended up dying in such a terrible way, and our whole family was obviously distraught. A few days earlier for Christmas, my parents ended up buying me an iPad, and I was so excited. After Alan passed away, we noticed my iPad was very buggy. Every time we spoke to him or mentioned his name, suddenly the A key would stick and repetitively type out AAAA, then backspace and delete, like nothing happened. Me and my mum were once in our kitchen, talking about how she wanted to bring it to the Apple store and get it looked at, considering it was a brand new device and worth a lot of money. She didn't want me to end up with a buggy iPad. After we had that single conversation, it never happened again. Also, on many occurrences, our cabinet doors would open in our kitchen. I always knew it was Alan saying hello. Since then, I hadn't had an experience with him until last March. Just so happens that me and his brother were on mushrooms together in the same house he used to live in. We were at the dining table talking about him. Just then, when his name was mentioned, the basement door, only about 6 feet from us, swung open, like Alan was joining in our conversation, telling us, "I miss you too." Not super creepy, but just a little paranormal action from a loved one. During a road trip with my dad to visit a college in Arizona, we passed through Santa Fe, New Mexico, and decided to stay at a motel there. The motel had a vintage charm to it, with various antiques displayed in glass cases. It seemed like a perfectly acceptable place to spend the night. After settling into our beds, something peculiar happened. I suddenly jolted out of bed, consumed by an intense surge of anger, as if I was ready to engage in a fight. Startled, I glanced towards the door and saw what I can only describe as a figure resembling a dementor, its eyes fixated on me. My dad, who occupied the other bed closest to the door, calmly inquired about the commotion. In that moment, embarrassment washed over me, and I hastily dismissed the encounter as nothing more than a play of shadows. Convinced it was a figment of my imagination, I returned to bed, but not before catching a glimpse of the clock, which read precisely 3 a.m. The following morning, as my dad and I hit the road again, he initiated a conversation about the previous night. I recounted my experience, sharing the details of the dementor-like figure. To my surprise, my dad disclosed to me that he too had seen something unusual. He described observing a man wearing a cowboy hat, intently staring in my direction when I had abruptly gotten up. My dad, typically a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, expressed his unease, adding further to the unsettling nature of the encounter. The incident left us both with a sense of bewilderment, unable to fully comprehend the nature of what we'd seen. The motel stay, with its antique-filled ambience, took on an eerie quality in retrospect. While we may never fully understand the true nature of the encounter, it remains an unsettling and thought-provoking memory from our trip through Santa Fe. I got stabbed once when I was 13. I was walking home from the local Kroger near my house. The walk was a golf cart path on the side of a highway, with a deep forest off the side of the path. I had walked the route numerous times before, but I hadn't ever been out past dark to go to the Kroger. I was about halfway to my house when I saw a figure standing in the bushes off the trail. I kept walking because I just wanted to go home at that point, and the figure stepped out in front of me. He looked like he was maybe a year or two older than me. Granted, I had always looked older than my age as a kid. The guy demanded I give him the bag and my wallet. I told him I didn't have any money, and he'd have to take my food from me if he wanted that. He stabbed me in the leg. I started laughing at him psychotically, as I was struggling with a lot of mental health issues and already experiencing stuff. He turned to start running back towards the woods, and he left the knife in my leg. I hobbled home and went to my neighbor's house to assess the damage, as my parents weren't home and I needed help. His dad gave me stitches and I passed out on his couch. I still have the knife. We never found the guy. This is my reason for always carrying a knife and a backpack for my groceries. Moral of the story, don't be cocky when faced with danger. Some people will hurt you regardless. I was 19, driving home from work late at night from a bar and grill. My drive home was about 14 miles and roughly half an hour. I noticed a blue car immediately after leaving. As it was late, maybe midnight to 1 a.m., with only cars around. It was not police, and no one I recognized. A bearded average man. This car followed me all the way home, down the main roads, and I turned into my sub, and so did they. I was keen to this, and started driving in loops as to not lead them to my house. They followed me down every side street. They were very clearly going well out of their way to follow me in the middle of the night. This is when I went into fight or flight. If I got pulled over, I would explain to the officer what was happening, and be happy to go to the station where it was safe. We were the only cars on the road. Then after a few shakes, I lost them. Or so I thought. I made sure to speed enough on a few turns with my lights off so they couldn't see where I turned, and sat for a minute with all my lights off and phone down to pitch black. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Then after a minute I saw them turn on my road. I left my headlights off and absolutely drove lawlessly to escape them. No headlights, stop signs, or speed limits in an urban area. It was honestly insane. Luckily, I drove to a friend's house, and he had a small party going on, so I knew I was safe. I'm never gonna know who it was or why they did it, or what would have happened if I'd had led them home. Thank God I'm a great driver, and watched enough spy movies to probably save my life that night. A few years ago, 3 friends and I embarked on a vacation to a resort. On the 3rd or 4th night, feeling a bit worn out, we collectively decided to skip the evening's festivities and hit the sack early. Me and my friend were roommates, and the other 2 friends occupied a separate room on a different floor. As I lay in bed on the verge of drifting off to sleep, I turned over and noticed my friend pacing around the room. Assuming he was engrossed in texting his girlfriend or simply restless, I didn't think much of it. He moved out of my line of sight, and I felt a slight sink in my bed. At that point, I figured he must be putting on his shoes, and despite the oddness of the situation, exhaustion prevailed, urging me to doze off. The next morning over breakfast, I casually inquired about my friend's whereabouts the previous night. To my surprise, he responded with confusion, stating that he hadn't left the room at all. Puzzled, I probed further, asking why he was walking around. He had revealed that he had mistaken those footsteps as mine. Considering the circumstances, it became clear that no one else possessed a key to our room. Yet both of us had witnessed someone wandering within our shared space. This inexplicable occurrence left us intrigued and somewhat unsettled, as we were left grappling with the mystery of the phantom presence that had seemingly shared our room that night. Once when I was in high school, I had a part-time job as a fast food cashier. I was 15, single, and called hot by a lot of men in my class. We had a regular customer, he looked about 25, pretty nice looking, called Ethan. He came every Saturday, one of the 3 days out of I worked that week. A lot of the time that he came in, since I was working after he got his order, I would take a break and sit down and talk with him. He was a pretty nice guy, and we became good friends. However, after almost a year of him coming every Saturday, he started to seem sort of weird. Every time we sat down and spoke, he would act really strange and compliment me a lot. On Valentine's Day, he came in and brought me a gift, but every Saturday after that, he would bring me a gift too. It was like he was obsessed with me. When I walked home from work, I had to go through a shady area in town. Nobody really bothered me though. One day when I was walking home, Ethan popped out of nowhere and said he brought me a gift. I was thankful as usual, until I noticed that instead of clothes, he wore rags. I asked him what happened, and he said he spent all his money on me. Worried, I asked him why. He said he loved me more than anything. I was surprised. I had a very low attention span and did not feel the same. I told him, and he was really sad and angry and started yelling a bunch of stuff, swearing. I got scared and tried to run, but he grabbed my arm and repeatedly asked me to love him. He put me into a kind of chokehold, but he was not choking me, he just tried to pull down my shirt, but I slipped out of his arms and ran to my house. That night, I heard glass breaking downstairs. I was scared and locked my door, and I heard footsteps slowly creep up the stairs to my room. It was Ethan. He broke my door down with an axe and came in. I called the cops before he got in, luckily. He was going to sexually assault me, but the cops showed up in time. Apparently he was a criminal put in prison for murder. He was driven insane, and according to what Ethan said, I was his anchor. He was put in jail, and I haven't seen him since. Probably for the best. This summer, my 17-year-old daughter was working a late night shift. It was a little after midnight when I left to pick her up, so when I stepped outside it was eerily silent. You couldn't hear the frogs, insects, nothing. I stood there just waiting to hear them again, but I had this awful feeling something was watching me. I got in the car and just shook off the weird feelings and turned the radio up loud to distract myself. So I started driving down the road with my brights on, as there are many deers in the area, and make a right-hand turn once onto another road. Making the turn, my headlights caught a glimpse of something. It was black, quick, and jumped from the roadway onto the side of a steep hill on the opposite side. I was scared at this moment. I was afraid to drive past this area. For the remaining drive, I kept trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Was it a deer? Some animal? Maybe an alien? The possibilities were endless, but I had never seen anything like it. When we made it home, the nightlife noises were back and thriving. There was no eerie feeling that something was lurking nearby. A few weeks had passed and I had spoken with a neighbor that lives 10 minutes away, as we live way out in the country. And she said some weird things had been happening around there. I thought maybe she meant a thief or coyotes were around. Then she said, "You might think I'm crazy, but," and goes on to tell me how silent it would get at night more often, and there were some dark figures that they had seen. Not just her, but also a few other people that lived nearby. So I tell her of my ordeal of the night that I had experienced, and told her it was hard to explain exactly what I had seen, because I'd never seen anything else like it. She asked me, did it look like a Dementor from Harry Potter? Oh my god, yes. She tells me her sister-in-law was out visiting and left after it was dark to go home. Driving close to the area where my house is located, my neighbor gets a call from her sister-in-law that's screaming and crying hysterically. They drove to where she was, and she was too scared to even open the car door. Eventually, she was able to tell us that she'd seen something black crouching over in the roadway. She slows down and is being cautious, but this dark figure stands up and jumps to the nearest tree and climbs it so fast and disappears. She was shaken up. They had to drive her home. It never happened again, and I haven't heard any other stories from my other neighbors. I will forever be cautious when it goes silent on a hot summer's night. Who can I even share this with, other than a few close neighbors who had also seen this mysterious dark figure? If I told anyone, then they'd think I were crazy. Winters are usually silent here, and I hope whatever this thing was, moved on, or is at least hibernating all winter. There was an abandoned hotel in a town called Marysville, California. In its prime, it was a bustling theater and hotel that housed prominent figures during the late 1800s to mid-1900s before going completely abandoned. My brother and his friends broke in one night and explored the 15-story building, and he told me about some of the things he found. As soon as they entered the hotel, they were greeted by an eerie silence that made them feel like they were being watched. They could hear their footsteps echoing through the empty hallways, and it seemed like every creak and groan of the building was magnified in the quietness. The first floor was relatively normal, with broken furniture and shattered glass scattered around, but as they made their way up, they started to notice something odd. The walls were covered in strange symbols and graffiti, some of which seemed to depict satanic rituals. As they reached the theater auditorium on the top floor, they were shocked to find a large pentagram drawn in the center of the room. The air was thick with the sense of foreboding, and they could almost feel a presence watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, they heard footsteps coming from the floors above them, and they froze, looking at each other with terror in their eyes, as they knew they weren't alone. They decided to investigate the upper floors, but some of the doors were blocked off or locked, so they couldn't explore everything. As they made their way back down, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from one of the rooms they passed. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded twisted and inhuman. My brother and his friends were scared out of their minds, but they kept going. Suddenly, they turned a corner and saw her. A naked woman, wild, covered in filth, with long matted hair and eyes that seemed to glow with madness. She was chasing rats and screaming at the top of her lungs. They didn't wait to find out what would happen next. They ran as fast as they could, trying to avoid the debris and obstacles in their path. They could hear the woman's maniacal laughter echoing through the halls as they ran down the stairs. As they burst out the front doors of the hotel, they looked back and saw the woman standing in the doorway, still screaming and flailing. My brother and his friends have never been more relieved to be outside in the fresh air and away from that terrifying place. They knew they'd never forget the horror that they had experienced that night. This happened to my friend almost 2 decades ago. We were 10, her and me 12, both girls. We snuck out in the middle of the night on a sleepover because we had some dumb urge to get cola. And during that time, the only store that was working nights was a small liquor store about a half-hour walk away from where our house was. It was next to the train station, which was just a sketchy part of town, full of drunks and like. But us being young, we didn't know what to expect and just went. The walk to the place was fine, quiet, as midnights are in a small town. But shortly after we started walking back, we noticed a car go by. It happened to be the only car at the time, so we took notice. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed when it drove past us again, and a few minutes later again. So we got alert and started walking faster. We were walking on the main street, which was pretty lit, so I assume now the only reason nothing happened was because the person driving wanted us to get to a darker spot. He took a turn towards a darker street once, trying to get ahead of us, but as we walked past it, he drove out and started following. The moment we reached this street, where we had to turn to our house, we took a sidewalk shortcut and ran. The shortcut didn't allow the car to drive after us straight away, and instead he had to drive slightly straight, then right again into our street. Unlucky the shortcut existed, because at that time the street had no light, absolutely none. But we noticed the car did actually start turning to our street, and that's how we confirmed it was actually following us. Good thing the house was very close by. The time he turned to our street, so we couldn't drive fast enough, but my God, when I think of it now, I'm even more frightened than I was then, because I knew what could have happened since I understand it more. We could have been kidnapped, molested, or even killed, who knows. At the time, my friend and I forgot about this situation the very next day because we didn't realize the danger that we'd been in. I wish I was smart enough back then and remembered the number plate. I hope that the person didn't hurt anyone in that town, and I feel lucky nothing happened to us, and my hometown is now seen in a completely different light after the dawning realization hit. I am chronically ill, and one morning had a doctor's appointment. It's a regular thing for me. When I was making my way home, I had taken the exit off the highway that I needed. As I turned left, I noticed that there were flashing lights and a siren behind me. The road was only one lane for a short time, but then a left turn lane opened at a stoplight. That was when I needed to go, so I pulled over there and stopped behind an SUV. The fire truck goes around, taking a left, so going in the direction that I also needed to go. After they pass, we turn and start heading down that road. However, the SUV in front of me was only going at 15 miles an hour for some reason, and I slowed down. There was no passing lane, just a middle of the road turn lane. I couldn't go around him. When we come up on a road, they are all braking suddenly and pull over towards that road, but blocking it as if they were perpendicular to it. I thought this was weird, but maybe it was someone who got lost and didn't know where they were going. As I passed them, they honked their horn at me. I'm not sure why. I wasn't being aggressive or anything. I think nothing of it beyond, "That's weird," and I carry on driving. They pull out immediately after I pass and start flashing their brights at me. Again, quite weird, but okay. Then something happens that made me alert and nervous. He starts charging my car from behind, pulls back away, then slams on the gas and almost hits my car, then beeps and flashes his brights. Rinse and repeat. I was feeling unsafe at this point, so I tapped my brakes. Nope, just caused him to honk more. He charged my car 4 times. A while up the road there was a roundabout and I had to go left. Turns out he was going left too. However, the road then had only 2 lanes instead of 1, and I stayed in the left lane as our apartment complex was just half a mile up the road. I was behind a semi who was going slower, but I was fine with that, hoping the guy behind me would just pass and let me go. He got over into the right lane, so I thought he would just leave me alone. But then he saw I had my blinker on, so he immediately hit the brakes and pulled behind me, and turned his blinker to follow me. By this time I'm really scared. I knew that if I pulled in he would prevent me from leaving by blocking the entrance, so I sure as hell didn't want him finding out where I lived. I turned my blinker off and went straight instead. A while up the road, he pulled beside my car, honking and screaming at me. I was frozen in fear, so I just stared straight ahead, not looking at him, and after a minute that felt like an hour, he gunned it and raced ahead of me in the truck. I was able to reach the road and turn around to go home. Even after arriving home though, I was scared that he would find out where I lived and do something to my fiance's car, which at that point I was driving. Luckily, that did not happen and I was safe. Ever since then, I've been hyper alert to people who are behind me, paranoid that someone else is going to follow me. Yes, I know the chances logically of that are slim, but anxiety doesn't listen to logic. So, to the crazy road raging driver, let's not meet again. This happened last Wednesday night. Recently, my company started providing armed security for an old hotel under a new name and management in southern Colorado Springs. I don't know exactly how old this place is, but it has been an active hotel since I was very young. Well, as we started the contract, the standard for the first 2 months was to have 2 security officers working, 1 senior and 1 new. My last shift, I was paired with a really annoying rookie, and this kid was uptight and dumb. For years, it's been known that many deaths, be it suicides, natural, or even a few instances of murder, had occurred at this hotel. My concern was to make sure heavy drug users didn't sneak into the building and squat. The new kid, though, wanted to inspect everything from the littlest noise to anyone walking around after midnight to see if they were guests or not. Well, I think when we got called to the basement, it changed the kid's overly inquisitive nature, or just plain affected him. Front desk to security, the hotel radio chimed out. "Go for security," I replied, thinking it was another guest call complaining about their neighbor or a homeless person in the lobby. "Can you both go check the basement?" A motion sensor trip was sent from the front desk switchboard, and I wasn't down there. "You'll have to come get the key from the access stairs," the night auditor said. Thinking to myself that we have to get a key to access it, how can someone have gotten down there? So as we approached the front desk, the night auditor stated that the switchboard had gone off twice more since she called us, less than 3 minutes earlier. So curious, I asked, how could someone get down there without a key to the stairwell? They mentioned that the broken elevator isn't really broken, but it only goes from the first floor to the service area of the basement without the maid's key. She stated it like it was no big deal. Annoyed, I grabbed the key off the counter and told the rookie to look alive in case something went down there, knowing that bit of information. At the mouth of the basement behind the doors, we began hearing heavy moans and breathing that sounded like it could have either been directly behind the door or on the complete opposite side of the basement. I tell the rookie that before we go in to not do anything unless I tell them to, and to stay on my 6 and follow. He nodded to show he understood, and I pushed open the door and announced, "Security, if anyone is in here, announce yourself now." It's a standard procedure when we enter an area on most of our properties when we suspect a trespasser is present. The rookie followed in behind me, and as I proceeded, I noticed the safety lights were on every other fixture, so I didn't feel necessary to turn on the full lights since there was enough to see everything clearly. Towards the complete opposite side of the basement, we began to hear what sounded like someone jingling a large keyring. My first thought was, oh joy, another meth head. As I began moving down the corridor, I heard the sound of the hood of a holster disengage. Pissed, I turned around to chastise the rookie for drawing his gun, but anger turned into confusion. He was standing there pale and fixed eyes forwards. "Did you hear that?" I replied that it might just be a machine switch, but reminded him to follow my lead. Now thinking that there was someone at the end of the corridor in the main laundry, I unsnapped my taser latch just in case. As we approached the end of the basement to the other locked stairwell, we didn't find anything out of the ordinary, or anyone trying to nest. But as we reached the freight elevator, we found a sign that set the next set of events in motion. A sign that read, "Security. All elevator access to the basement will be unavailable overnight from the 1st to the 12th. If you need access, get the key from the desk." I took a picture to show the night auditor, but got a chill while doing so. As the rookie and I began to double-check everything in the area on our way back to the stairs we came from, we started experiencing minor paranormal occurrences after the rookie found a few spiritual items. While still in the main laundry room towards the far back of the secondary stairs, the rookie found an unburned bundle of white sage wrapped in white lace, sitting on top of one of the large machines. Not knowing anything about sage, the rookie quickly snatched it off of the machine. "Hey, I think I found a weird joint." I turned to see him holding a bundle of white sage. "Put that down. It's not weed, it's cleansing sage." The kid didn't know anything about paranormal phenomena or how to protect against it, so I told him not to pick anything up, especially if it wasn't something he was familiar with. After he put it back where he grabbed it from, the first occurrence happened. As he set it down 20 feet behind him, a shelf filled with clean folded towels fell completely off the wall. As we documented it for a report, a small snigger came from further up in the corridor, but only like a split second. We began moving up to the next section, where the overstocked furniture and appliances were stored. An overhead pipe that was not leaking when we passed under it earlier was now leaking, almost like there was a huge crack that had just happened. I thought it was odd, because I was sure with the amount of water leaking that we would have heard it regardless of our location in the basement. As I was inspecting the pipe for the point of the leak, the rookie yet again picked something up. "Hey, this isn't sage, is it?" I look at him, smelling Palo Santo wood tied with a red ribbon. "Dude," I reply exhausted. When he gets it, he drops it. I look down at the puddle of water from the leaking to see a bare footprint within the water. Starting to get freaked out, I said we needed to get back upstairs. We proceeded to get to the second to last section, and immediately I noticed a cross sitting on the wall that I didn't spot earlier, with lavender sage wrapped in purple lace. "Take a quick look around and just make sure nothing's going on so we can go," I said, trying to not show that I was getting unnerved. Nothing happened in this section until before we moved through the double doors, with all the safety lights behind us and back to the laundry, when they started flickering. Honestly thinking something was going to happen, but not wanting to show that I was beginning to freak out, I told the rookie to move to the last room. Finally, the last area where we came from. Luckily in here there were only 2 small planning offices and the hub room. The difference between where we entered the basement till now was the light was on the inside of the hub room. I told the rookie to watch the hall as I checked the planning offices, which was quick, but when I went to the hub room to check and turn off the light, I looked down at the server monitor for the main cameras. In the hub room, it had the whole hotel cameras on this one monitor. Up at the front desk, the camera only showed the exterior, hallways of all the rooms and the pool areas, so I took a glance at the screen and noticed the lights were still flickering in the main laundry. A big pause in the lights occurred, and the night vision started to kick in. Slowly, a figure on the screen from the laundry became visible. I realized while intently staring that the figure was standing next to the machine that had the white sage on it. A bright flash lit the monitor as the light came back on. My heart dropped as the room lay empty. The person whom was standing in the night vision of the camera was just gone. I looked at the door frame of the hub room to see a bundle of black sage nailed to the frame, wrapped in black twine. I walk out, closing the door behind me. "We clear?" asked the rookie. Still stunned by what I saw on the camera, I replied, "We're done down here." We entered the stairwell and locked the door. Back in the lobby, the night auditor came over and asked if we found anything. "I'm going to go out front for a smoke, then I'll show you the issue we found," I said, pulling the pack from my pocket. The auditor seemed knowing that I was startled and asked, "You didn't touch the wards, did you?" I looked her in the eye without saying a word. "Oh dear, you did." It's been roughly a week since I've been there, and I can say I'm not looking forward to going back. I also found out this afternoon that the rookie I worked the nights with has departed the company. I wasn't told if he quit or was fired, but as of today he is no longer on staff, so I'm curious if he left because of what happened or another reason. This happened to me when I was 13 years old during the summer break of 8th grade. One summer morning, I decided to get some sushi for my sister and I from a restaurant that was a roughly 1 kilometer walk from our house. I went alone to the restaurant, got the food, and began walking back. At the time, I had just been introduced to makeup and was experimenting with eyeliner. On that specific day, I applied some very thick and bold eyeliner for fun, expecting to receive a few glances here and there. As I exited through the restaurant's parking lot, I walked past a tall man who appeared to be in his late 20s. He stared at me the entire time we walked in each other's direction. He was walking towards the restaurant and I away. I didn't think much of it, because I had just assumed he noticed my flashy eyeliner, as this was something I expected at the time. Upon passing him, I continued making my way home and jaywalked across the road. As I did this, I noticed that to my left a car stopped to allow for another person behind me to jaywalk themselves. I looked around to see it was the man from earlier, but wasn't he going the other way? I stepped onto the sidewalk and began walking home as quickly as I could. I sensed the man's footsteps behind me gaining speed as he spoke to someone on the phone suspiciously loud. I clearly heard him say over the phone something along the lines of, "I'm coming, I'll be there in 5 minutes." As if he wanted me to know he had somewhere to be, hence perhaps the change in direction. As he walked, and his speed gradually became a jog, and out of fear I looked behind me, as he stopped right behind me and asked, "Tu parles español?" I had an idea that he was asking me if I spoke Spanish, and I hesitantly said, "Hehe, no." For reference, I'm brown but not Hispanic, which may have been why he asked that. To get to my house, I took a shortcut, which is more of a secluded path across a park as I normally do. Now that I think of it, specifically in that situation, I shouldn't have taken that path considering this creep was walking by my side. I was quite naive back then, and didn't think too much about the situation. This man continued to walk by my side and continued to make conversation with me, talking about geography and his family heritage, while also asking me questions about myself, where I'm from, how many siblings I have, what my favorite subjects are. I went along with everything he said and also added onto the conversation. I think that due to being so nervous, I just went along with it, because I just don't know what else to do. Now, of course, I wouldn't entertain his conversation and would say I'm in a rush. At this point, we reach a fork in the path. I took the right path, hoping this man would take the left one, but to my surprise, he followed my turn. Now we continued walking. We entered a more secluded patch of grass, and I distinctly remember what he told me specifically at that spot, which began to ring all the alarms in my head, telling me this man was not normal, which I should have realized a long time before. He said something like, "You know, you're a very smart girl for your age. You're not like other girls." That's when I realized I needed to do something to get out of that situation immediately. Up ahead I saw another intersection which led to the opposite path from earlier, and I asked him, "Which way are you going from here?" He said, "Oh, I was supposed to take the opposite path from earlier, but I liked talking to you so much I took the same path so we could talk longer." At that moment I felt a mix of fear and disgust. As we near the upcoming intersection, he then says, "Well, I do have to go this way now. Do you have your phone with you so we could switch numbers? I enjoy talking to you." Now note, the entire way, I was clearly uncomfortable, and he was the only one talking with me mumbling a few responses here and there. I don't feel comfortable doing that. We just met and spoke for a few minutes." He then starts pushing it and gets visibly annoyed. "Come on, you must have Instagram, Snapchat, let's switch, I'd love to meet you again." He came off as aggressive and I began fearing for my life. "No, my parents wouldn't want me doing that." He then backs up a bit and says, "Oh, I respect your decision. Great meeting ya," and leaves. You can tell that this man wasn't normal, and that he probably didn't have a good intention approaching a young girl who was alone. I'm lucky he decided to eventually leave, and looking back at the encounter, I wish I hadn't done what I did and stayed in a more public zone. And to the creep that I met that day, please, let's never meet again. When I was younger, aside from being a printer, I did pickups and deliveries from the shop. This day I went down to the warehouse near the docks to pick up some paper. I'm about ready to pull out when I notice a semi about to pull out too. So I thought I'd let him pull out first, because I didn't want a semi on my arse on a gravel road. I pull out after him seconds later when the trailer unhooks from the truck. Now I got this huge, runaway object hurling itself in my face. Luckily, the wiring that hooks up the lights held, and it snapped back a bit, wobbled, and fell on its side. I got out and helped direct oncoming traffic, and told the driver that I never saw anything like that before. He then said like it was nothing, and that it happens once in a while. Does it? I just don't like being behind semis anymore, and always change lanes if I can. Some people think I'm nuts, but I think better safe than squished. The casino and hotel where I work have a reputation for being haunted. We affectionately dubbed the friendliest spirit the Hello Ghost. She manifests as a middle-aged woman who simply wants to grab your attention. If you've been with the same company for some time, she may even call out your name like, "Hey Elaine." If she doesn't know your name, she may settle for a general, "Hello." Most of us respond with a greeting in return. During our shutdown, the managers stayed on as caretakers, although I can't confirm if it was our Hello Ghost the general manager shared an experience with. He was heading to the bar for some coffee, when a middle-aged woman shouted at him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He had always dismissed our claims about the building being haunted, but this incident finally made him a believer. It was an eye-opening moment that set the tone for our welcome back meeting. There was an unmistakable sense of anger present in our cafe, although it's hard to pinpoint. The moment you cross the threshold when the cafe is closed is as if someone is screaming directly at your face. As you venture to the back kitchen, the anger lingers behind you. However, it completely dissipates when you reach the stairs leading to the basement storage area. To access the executive office, you must climb a flight of stairs and pass through a large conference room. Several employees have reported the eerie sensation of someone sitting in the corner quietly observing their every move. This feeling starts at the top of the stairs and abruptly vanishes once you step into the office space. One of the restrooms has a mischievous ghost that enjoys flushing toilets, dispensing paper towels, and turning on faucets at random intervals. Despite recently hiring an external company to handle the maintenance of paper towel dispensers, which are all new, the helpful ghost continues to make its presence known. One adorable employee even thanks the ghost for the paper towels right from the stall. The hotel, a small detached building with fewer than 10 rooms resembling a large house, has its fair share of supernatural encounters. Both guests and employees have reported being touched or pushed, hearing the sound of children running and laughing in the halls, finding bed linens disheveled after maid service, and witnessing televisions turning on by themselves. However, the most captivating story involves two managers. They both received calls from a room with a mains line, but upon answering it they found themselves met with silence. All they could hear was the faint sound of an old radio broadcast playing in the background, reminiscent of an early 1900s news report. When they investigated further, they discovered that the room in question was unoccupied. Overall, these experiences aren't necessarily terrifying, but they certainly make for an incredibly strange and surreal environment to work in on a regular basis. My grandma had given me a few quarters and told me to go to the community laundry room to get a Dr. Pepper from the vending machine. She offered enough for me to get one too, as it was still light enough that I could walk down the sidewalk and get back before sunset, if I was quick enough. Getting into the laundry room and getting the soda was easy enough, but as soon as I exited the building, a car idling in the middle of the street caught my eye. It hadn't been there when I'd gone in. I was already put off by this, as I had stranger danger drilled into my head for as long as I could remember. The car had its windows rolled down, and the driver was a young woman, with two older 30-year-old men in the back seat. They were looking straight at me and beckoning me to come closer. I immediately thought to myself, no way, and quickly broke eye contact and made my way back down the street. As if the car knew the complex, They drove alongside me and pulled into the parking lot next to my grandma's car. They started laughing with each other, still looking at me and whispering about something. At this point, I was terrified out of my little 14-year-old mind. I walked quickly inside my grandma's apartment, locked and bolted the door, and didn't sleep for the rest of my visit. Nothing came of it, but I thank my lucky stars every day that I avoided anything more unsettling from an encounter like that. A few years ago, my brother and I were driving a 15-hour drive overnight across 3 provinces in Canada to meet up with our parents and other family at our grandmother's house. It was summer, and it was rainy and flooding a lot of the roads that year, so we had to go off the main route we would take, Trans-Canada Highway, and take some more rural roads we never usually drove on this trip. In the middle of Saskatchewan, at around 2 to 3 a.m., we were on a road called Lewis Rail Trail. We had noticed and made some comments to each other about there being no one around, and so we were hoping that the roads weren't closed or redirected up ahead again. We both had noticed it seemed like the road was totally deserted, but also it wasn't the main highway, so we thought maybe it was just why there was no one else around as we were going along. We started to notice dead deer on the sides of the road, quite a few, and I remember saying something about hoping not to hit one. Then suddenly, we were on a strip of road for a solid 5 to 10 minutes where both sides of the road were absolutely covered in piles of dead deer, one on top of the other, mangled together, eyes open and shining up in the headlights, clearly dead, the way they were piled and twisted up like backwards necks and feet up in the air and stuff. No one in the middle of the road though. None of them splattered like they'd been hit by vehicles, no blood or gore, just hundreds of intact, dead deer bodies lining and piling on top of each other, on both sides of the road. I remember just staring at them and looking over at the dead piles on the other side of the road on occasion, and one of us saying something about being in between walls of dead deer. It sounded totally messed up, but my brother remembers it too. Feeling like we were in a daze or something, like in hindsight, it should have really freaked us out. But I remember just staring at them and seeing their eyes shining, and I remember thinking something, like it looked like they were all looking back at me, wondering why there were so many, wondering why no one else was around, but really, just not saying anything, and mindlessly driving through it for several minutes. It wasn't until after we were past them that there were other vehicles and semi-trucks passing by us again, that we sort of snapped out of it and said, that was really messed up. I had been taking pictures of everything that trip, random clouds, cows in fields, my feet on the dashboard, but I didn't think for a second to take a picture of this bizarre road lined with dead deer on both sides, because I don't think I was thinking straight. Me and my brother spoke about this often. It bothers us now because we both remember how weird it was, but saying it to other people never seems to justify the absurdity. I don't think people believe it happened, but we both witnessed it and felt the same thing. I grew up about 15 miles outside of downtown Portland in a semi-rural area. We lived on a windy country road in the hills where the homes were spread quite a distance apart. Our closest neighbor was maybe a 10-minute walk away. Our house was set back off the road and had a gravel driveway that took a sharp turn so you couldn't see the house from the road and vice versa. One warm spring day when I was 10, I was riding the bus home from school. As the bus squeaked to a stop at my driveway, I looked out the window to my left and saw a man in a grey pickup idling alongside the road, parked perpendicular to my driveway, almost blocking it. Being so young, I thought nothing of it, but when I got to the front of the bus, the driver held out her arm, blocking me from going any further. "Do you recognize that truck or that man?" I told her no. At that point, she opened her sliding window and motioned for him to move along. He looked at her, looked back ahead and didn't move. He wasn't looking at a map or anything, only sitting there. The bus driver then got into the intercom and told him he needs to move along, but he continued to stay there and then said, "Sir, you best move along. I'm not leaving until you're out of here." He finally left after a few minutes, and the bus driver let me out, and she said that she would wait several minutes for me to get to my driveway to my home. I told my mum what happened as soon as I got home, and the next morning she came with me to catch the bus and thank the driver. I believe she gave her some sort of gift, but I'm not sure exactly. After that incident, my mum and stepdad hollowed out a section of the trees at the end of the driveway as a hiding spot. In that spot, my siblings and I could watch the road while waiting for the bus in the mornings while nobody could see us. This incident gives me the chills when I think back. If my bus driver hadn't been so vigilant in looking out for me, and if the man in the pickup had been up to no good, I would have been a goner. Right after my driveway, there is a sharp turn and a steep downhill, and the bus would have been out of sight within seconds, and there'd have been no witnesses. This story happened to me around 20 years ago. I was living in the UK, and it's the usual summer holiday ritual at that time. My parents booked an all-inclusive holiday to Lanzarote. The school year was finished, and I was looking forward to many lazy days at the beach. Unfortunately, things seemed a little off from the get-go. When we arrived at the hotel, the staff seemed confused and told us they had no rooms reserved for us. At the time, when everything was done through travel agents and other travelers had no issues. After exchanging some very confused looks, the staff finally gave us a room, number 101. After being allowed to check in, my parents and I head straight over to the beach to catch some sun and start the holiday feeling. I'm an only child, and it was just me, my mum, and my dad. Now, my dad is the typical super cautious dad who will always check keys, wallet, glasses about 3 times before leaving the house. After barely 5 minutes of being at the beach, everything had gone missing. Sure, it's very possible that someone stole it from us, but it was later in the afternoon where there were very few people around. Now, most of the rest of the story comes from what my parents told me after the events. Believe me, my parents are not the type to invent stories. They are very much, if we don't see it, we don't believe it. 2 days in, and my dad starts to suffer from extreme pain in his shoulder. He had to find a local clinic for a steroid injection, but also had difficulty sleeping at night, so I went to the main bedroom with my mum, and my dad stayed in the living room tossing and turning trying to sleep. According to my mum, every night at 3 a.m, she would hear banging coming from the living room area. At first she thought it was my dad trying to tidy up after the day, but being clumsy about it. But after a few nights of being woken up by this banging, she decided to go and ask him to keep it down, only to find him fast asleep on the sofa. Not just my mum had the strange experience. My dad did have a lot of trouble sleeping, and so would play Tetris on the Game Boy. One night, he was playing as he was unable to sleep, and he felt the room become very, very cold. He then heard footsteps walking in the room behind him. My dad, a well-educated, respected engineer, a man of science, was freaked out. He refused to look behind him and climbed onto the sofa and did not look back. There were various other instances that things happened. This last episode happened the night before we were due to leave, and is my own experience. I had been told to go pack my suitcase in my bedroom by my mum. I started folding my clothes when suddenly a rancid smell filled the room. A smell I had never smelt before, and to this day have not smelt since. Putrid, rancid, rotting. I can't describe the exact words, but I ran out of the living room and asked my parents to come see if some pipe had broken. They came in, smelt it, and within 15 seconds the smell disappeared. My parents looked at each other and suddenly said in cheery voices, "We can all sleep in the living room tonight, it'll be fun." I didn't question it, as it was a time when I just did what my parents asked. It was the middle of the night. I'm laying between my mum and dad on the floor of the living room when I open my eyes and see a figure standing in the corner of the room. I say figure, but whatever it was slightly blurry and brown, not particularly tall, but definitely humanoid in shape. I look at this figure for a few moments and then asked, "Who are you?" At which point I felt my mum lay her hand on my head and told me to go back to sleep. I know this is not a particularly scary story, but I wouldn't say I or my parents have any sort of sixth sense or sensitivity to these things. I also think that given the setting of a 2-week beach holiday, ghosts are not really something that come to the forefront of your mind. All I know is that there was some sort of presence in that small hotel apartment. Ghost or something different, who knows? I guess I just feel that, although science has supposedly disproved all these theories, there are definitely more things in the universe than we are currently aware of. Just a little bonus story. This one's more about revenge than anything truly horrific, but I think you'll enjoy it nonetheless. I used to work for a large state agency, and after 5 years had become a middle manager. My office was in the state office tower downtown, and parking was scarce, but middle management and up got reserved parking in the garage attached to our building. This was a great perk, since it's a cold state, and on days that the tower garage is full, you have to park at a private garage about a mile away and walk. One day, I had to run a few errands and pulled up to the garage a little later than usual. By the time I had gotten there, the sign on the garage said it was full, but I had a badge that let me go in anyway, and drive down into my reserved spot. There was a man at the gate who was trying to get in despite the sign saying it was full. When I realized he didn't have a badge, I backed up a little and honked my horn to let him know he could back up. This infuriates him. He gets out of his car and flips me off, and hurls some choice words my way. As he backs up out of the spot, I pull up to the gate, and he yells some more words my way about how stupid I am and that I can't read that the garage is full. I ignore him and assume he's just some guy there to have a meeting at one of the dozen or so agencies in our building and park my car. I get to my desk and get an email from the HR that one of the upper managers was sick and that I needed to cover down on some interviews. Interviews in our agency start with a group of prospective employees working on a small project together, and then the candidates sit in front of a panel individually. I walk into the room where all the candidates are sitting, and I see him there, the parking jerk. I was in my car, so he didn't get a great look at me, but I knew exactly what he looked like. The candidates introduce themselves and get to work on their small project. Parking Jerk was trying to control the entire process, but they successfully completed the project as a team. The panel then asked all the candidates to go sit in the hall while we discussed, and we would call them individually when we were ready. Once they were all out of the room, I giddily told my co-workers about my interactions with Parking Jerk, and they die laughing. We call him in first and begin asking him basic employment questions. He is otherwise a strong candidate but was very full of himself. The rest of the panel goes first, and finally it's my turn. How do you react under stress? I handle it fine. I'm a very level-headed person. Come on, everyone gets a little flustered at some point. Not me. Cool as a cucumber. So you never do anything like get out of your car and yell at a stranger? We're met with silence. Or call them names and learn how to read? That's when we all see the blood drain from his face. Do you realize this job puts you in front of the media frequently? And someone is always watching. You do realize that if you were to work here, your actions would reflect on not just you, but they would also reflect your director, the department as a whole, and state government. Do you think that if you were in my position, you would hire someone who behaved as rudely as you did? He hangs his head in shame. I think I may not be cut out for this position. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person, but you may not be ready for this job. He was deflated. I really think that was the first time someone held him accountable for all his actions. He did not get the job, but a few years later I saw him working for another agency, and by all accounts, he sounded like he had learned. I'm a 15-year-old male, and last year I was on my bike riding in a local park when this dude in a shiny red Jeep Wrangler pulls up next to me and asks for directions. Hey, do you know how to get to Chalk Mill Town? Oh yeah, just go down this road and turn right at the gas station. Or maybe just go that way? It's just my GPS is broken. Where are you from? This is the point, I'm getting a bit creeped out. The dude's tone and general vibes are a bit off, and I'm also autistic. I'm not very good at judging tones, but he's using the same tone that psychologists talk to you during a panic attack. He's not asking for directions like a normal person. I don't really know how to describe it, but the way he was looking at me made me feel really uncomfortable. Here? What's your name? Charlie. My name's Dave. Nice to meet you, Dave. Yeah, you're a pretty cute name. Thanks. You want to go in and have some fun? At this point, I'm starting to get back on my bike to go home because I'm getting really scared, but I'm trying not to show it because I don't know if this dude has a gun or something. All I know is that he's a huge Jeep with tinted windows and I don't like the situation. You want to stay and chat for a while? No thanks, it's almost dinner time and my mum's probably waiting for me. Then I biked home. When I got home, I waited for my mum to finish her phone call and told her. She called the police. That about sums it up. But I can't help but feel this profound sense of dread from what might have happened from this situation. I work in a hotel situated in a relatively newer building constructed in 2007. However, the plot of land where the hotel stands has a rich history. From 1880 until 2001, there was a grand theatre that operated until the 1960s and later transformed into a nightclub until its closure in the late 1980s or early 1990s. Since I started working here in December, I've heard various stories from fellow workers suggesting that the place might be haunted. Initially, I didn't pay that much attention to these tales, as I hadn't personally experienced any notable energies except for two peculiar occurrences. In the lower ground area, there is a distinct pocket of cold, where some guests have reported their room's televisions randomly switching on. Similarly, directly above the ground floor, I sometimes sense a momentary audio distortion, akin to the sensation of submerging one's head underwater. However, as an empath, I haven't detected any strong emotional resistance, so I dismissed these phenomena as mere oddities. However, recent events have started to make me question my initial assessment. Last week, while reviewing security camera footage, my attention was drawn to an anomaly, an unidentified black shape moving across one of the cameras. This movement couldn't be explained by the typical glitches or malfunctions I often observe. When my colleague went to investigate if there was an insect or debris obstructing the camera, the unexplainable occurrence repeated itself. This incident prompted my colleague and me to discuss the possibility of the building being haunted. They asked for my opinion, and I shared my previous observations, emphasizing the absence of any substantial feelings or experiences. It was precisely at this moment when I expressed my skepticism that one of our handheld radios positioned next to my colleague unexpectedly emitted loud static despite being untouched on the desk. Reacting quickly, I grabbed the radio and turned it off. Strangely enough, my colleague who was sitting beside the radio complained of feeling as though someone had scratched his shoulder. Simultaneously, a mark appeared on his shoulder, coinciding with the radio's sudden burst of static. Within 48 hours of this incident, a long-term resident guest reached out to us, requesting a room change. Unbeknownst to her, since the event with the radio, she had encountered unsettling experiences in her room, including finding the bathwater running when she returned, the kettle turning on by itself approximately half-hour later, unpleasant dreams, and ultimately her baby's bottle sliding across the bedside table and falling off without any apparent cause. The accumulation of these events has deeply disturbed her to the point where she cannot bring herself to enter the room alone to retrieve her belongings. This all started when I was 7 years old, living in an old house. We caught an orb on camera, and it wasn't a dust speck because it was moving irregularly. I would always hear things talking to me in a loud whisper, and one of the only experiences that truly terrified me are as follows. I would always have a radio on at night, and a commercial came on. This so-called commercial was filled with people screaming in a deep, droning voice that said things that I couldn't understand. It could have been just a horror movie, but I'd never heard it from anyone else. Something else I learned from my mum that happened when I was at school is that my toys would be moved from upstairs in my room to the bottom of the stairs. I also remember my brother sleeping in my bed with me lots of times, but whenever I talked about it, neither my mum or brother remembers whatever's happening. And I don't know if this counts, but when I walked past this one certain house, something inside me was telling me to never look at it. I did never acknowledge the house. The house had a bunch of religious things on the porch, and it always gave me an evil vibe. Another night, I was looking out my window and under the streetlight when I saw a little girl dressed in a white nightgown, and when I looked up, she disappeared. Then, we moved out of that house and moved to a different town with my mum's boyfriend, and this kind of thing took off in terms of spiritual encounters. I would be laying in bed, and again, I'd hear the whispers yell. It was always happening each night, and one night I was so scared I ran into my mum's room. I had to go into the basement, and all the while the voices talking to me were getting louder and louder and more aggressive. I would be laying in bed, and my bed would shake violently. And when I went to my brother because I was kind of scared, his bed would start to shake. Then the water faucet would drip, and I'd go out and check and it was dry in the sink. Another experience I had is when we were watching a movie in the living room, when I saw something pass in front of the window. I asked them if they saw that, and none of them did. Then, when we moved out, we moved to my grandpa's. It's a very old house. It's been in our family since the 1800s, so there's lots of history and probably spirits. I'd hear something crawling in my vent, and I'd hear something move like someone was walking in the attic. This happened years after we first lived there, but it still happened at my grandpa's house. I had my door locked, and I heard a big wheels toy roll up to my door. My door then opened, and something crawled into bed with me. Another experience was when I got up to go to the bathroom, and something was on the other side of the door preventing me from opening it. I'd grown used to the paranormal, so I pushed as hard as I could, got the door open, but something slammed shut against it. I didn't try to open it again. And just the other day I was gaming with my door open, and I saw something white approach my door frame. I looked at it and it disappeared. My cats were in the room, so maybe that's what prevented it from coming in. In another town we lived in, the dishwater started up by itself, and I saw some black figure on top of my fan blades, and a music box started playing by itself. My closet door had also slammed shut by itself on multiple occasions. In a different town, I had 2 different rooms in our apartment over the time we lived there. In my first room, I was lying in bed when I felt a drop of water on my forehead. I touched my forehead. Dry. I touched the ceiling fan. Dry. Then I was getting water on another night. It was around 2 a.m., and I heard my mother call out for me. But it was so obviously not my mother. Something about her voice was off. I stopped in my tracks, not leaving my room, and saw a black figure slink back into her room. In the other room I was laying in bed, and I heard something from the dark part of my room call my name. Another time when I was walking past my room, I saw a figure walk from my closet to my doorway. Then, in another room, there were fairy lights that could only be turned on by flipping the switch on, and none of us went into the room out of respect for the girl who used it. The lights were on at different times, and I heard my cats play with their toys in the living room. The only thing is that I had all the cats in the room with me. Another time I was playing the Ouija board with my friends on Halloween. One of my friends heard me say something to him, but I didn't say anything. And at a different time, I was driving home with my mum, and I saw the same little girl in a white nightgown in front of the neighbour's lawn in broad daylight. All in all, I've had quite a few terrifying experiences with spirits. They've always stopped bugging me when I ask them to, but they always come back. None of my other family members experience this, and I've always been able to hear and see things others cannot. In 2007, I was a junior in college, and my friends and I went to spring break to Myrtle Beach. Being broke and wanting to save money on flights, we decided we would just drive there from our school in New Hampshire, and splitting the cost of gas would be cheaper. So we piled 5 of us into my friend's Hyundai hatchback and drove the 17 hours to get there. We were almost there, and we were driving through this little town called Fair Bluff, North Carolina. We get in there bright and early. First and foremost, the second we got in there, it was an absolutely morbid sight everywhere we looked. Just the year before, the town had been devastated by flooding in Hurricane Matthew. Broken down houses, all rotting from water damage, just apocalyptic. And everyone in the car agreed that the energy in this place was dreary. Despite this, we were driving slowly because we couldn't look away. So this memory plays in slow motion in my mind. Second, I'm from New York and went to college in New Hampshire, so I was oblivious to the fact that North Carolina was home to vultures. So as we're driving slowly, we see a big old animal we couldn't quite make out being eaten by vultures, and then we come across like 3 more right on the side of the road. That definitely adds to the spook factor, but everyone was still composed. We keep driving, and eventually drive by a hearse, which sound normal, but this hearse was pulled over on the side of the road, and there was nothing around for a good 2 to 3 miles. Except open fields and abandoned decaying houses, and 2 men were literally loading a casket onto it, just on the side of the road, no funeral home around for miles. So we were of course all questioning it, but ultimately just eager to get out of there at this point. The freakiness of it all came to a head when we drove by a literal cross burning. We drove by a cross that was pretty far out in the field, but it was huge, and we saw it clearly. It must have been at least 10 feet tall, wooden, and was scorched, partially burnt, still stuck in the ground, and at that point we just hightailed it. We were happy to see the welcome sign of the next town. We shook it off and proceeded to have fun at spring break. At the end on the way back, however, it started to snow, and as we were driving through Fair Bluff again, this time it was pitch black, without a single light except for our headlights. The car was hydroplaning like crazy, and we were dangerously low on gas. We got out of there all right, but I felt genuine fear, both the first and even more the second time we went through. You'll never catch me rolling through there again. I live beside a cemetery, so paranormal experiences aren't really surprising in this circumstance. When I was around the age of 9, my sister was around 12. We shared a bedroom. To give you a bit of an idea, my bed was against one side of the wall, and hers was against the other, and there was a window between our beds. So one night I woke up, and I turned over to see a dark figure of a woman standing beside the head of my sister's bed. She had medium-length hair, a tank top, and a skirt on. It took me a second to realize that she had no legs. I put my pillow over my head for at least a minute, expecting her to be gone, but when I took the pillow off my head, she was still in the same spot. I was completely terrified and began kicking the wall. After a minute or so, my dad got up to check what was going on, so he decided that he would sleep in my bed and I would sleep in his with my mum. Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up the lady was standing beside me, and I jumped and moved closer to my mum. Then I saw what looked like a little version of me sitting beside her, partially on the bed, wearing the exact same clothes that I was wearing at that moment. I also figured out that it was my sister's elementary boyfriend's niece that had passed away a long time ago. A few days later, my sister's boyfriend passed away too. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I was sitting down with my fiancé talking about creepy things that happened to us as kids, and I remembered this. I was around 8 or 9 and my neighborhood would do this Christmas house celebration where every house would do something different. I grew up in a quite secure where everyone knows everyone part of Florida. Well, it was all the neighborhood kids and myself playing outside while the parents drank and did festive holiday stuff. As we were playing, this car pulled up and asked if one of us could show them the pool. For reference, my house was at the back of a neighborhood, and to get to it you had to pass the clearly visible pool. This was an older couple around 50, and I would say so my brain didn't really register the threat. I was a very kind, naive kid, so I offered to go with them to show them the pool. Right before I was to get into the car, I finally remembered to tell a parent. So me and the other kids ran inside, got my mother, and upon hearing what was going on, the rest of the adults ran outside and the car and couple were gone. It's crazy to think about how I was almost likely kidnapped on Christmas, and who knows what would have happened to me. So, to the couple in the car, if you're still alive, let's not meet. This story takes place around 2010 when I was 12. My 2 best friends and I, along with a few other kids in the neighborhood that were also our age, often rode bikes and explored around the neighborhood. Whenever we rode bikes, we started to notice this older white sedan, around a late 90s model that would follow us around the neighborhood no matter what street we turned on, and they would always go very slow and never stop following us. They wouldn't turn into a house or anything. This went on for several months, and one day one of my friends was able to get the license plate, and that friend's parents contacted the police. The police came out and got information from us, and when they looked up the plate it did not match the car. So with the behavior of the person in the car and the fact the license plate didn't match, it was possible that the person driving the car was trying to kidnap one of us and had stolen plates. We never were able to figure out who this person was, and to this day, over 14 years later, I still think about this situation and wonder what their intentions were, especially when I'm alone walking around the neighborhood, just wondering if they're still out there, and I hope they're not stalking anyone else. I'm a native of Long Island, New York, which, as you may know, has been settled for a long time and has a lot of little old towns, especially on the eastern end of the island. We even have some Revolutionary War history. At the time of this story, I was seeing a guy from the local area, and one night he took me to a bar called the Checkmate Inn in Setterket, because some friends of his worked there, and it was supposed to be this cool old local spot with a few interesting stories. It used to be a private home and sits on a barely lit single-lane road winding through rows of tall trees. It actually still looks like an old house and even has a cellar where they store the alcohol. Its second story has been converted into some apartments above the bar area, and staff sometimes rent them out. Across the street from the Checkmate is the Thompson House, an old wooden structure built in 1709, belonging to a doctor during the Revolutionary War, and is now a museum of colonial medicine. We got there before the big rush of customers showed up, and we were able to talk with one of his buddies who tended the bar that evening. Somehow the subject of ghost stories came up. My date's buddy told me that he'd rented one of the upstairs apartments and had some weird experiences up there. There had been a few nights when he'd awoken at 3 a.m. to see a shadow standing on the opposite side of the bedroom, or being alone in the apartment at night and hearing footsteps passing through the other rooms. Having glass beer bottles suddenly slide off the kitchen table and crash to the floor, or witnessing his bedroom curtains waving wildly as if blown by a strong wind, only to find that the windows were closed and locked. One night he woke up in the darkness to see an old man leaning over his bed, looking furiously angry. Thinking someone had broken in, he yelled at the man and sat up. But in that moment, the man vanished. His brother had worked at the bar and rented one of the apartments before him as well, and reportedly saw not only the shadowy figure of an old man, but also what appeared to be a young woman in a pale dress in his bedroom at night. He never got a good look at her face, though. Apparently, the brother's girlfriend had stayed there with him overnight a few times, and had seen the woman as well. The bartender had worked at the Checkmate for about a year at that time, and while he no longer rented the apartment there, he continued to have strange things happen to him while on the job. The most active part of the building was the old cellar. He said it's very dark and cool down there, and several times he'd gone down to grab another keg of beer or bottles of liquor, and had bottles flung at him when he was the only one down there. He'd also been pushed on the stairs while carrying bottles once. His co-workers also told stories of having an uneasy feeling in the cellar, and having kegs rolled across the room suddenly, or having bottles thrown at them. When they went to confront whoever was on shift with them at the time, they were always in another part of the building and denied playing jokes. He wasn't sure about the history of the house or whether anyone had passed away there, though. The home is from the mid-1800s, so I'm not sure if it had many owners through the years. Well, I love ghost stories, and so did my date. We didn't find them so much scary as thought-provoking and entertaining. We enjoyed the rest of our night and went to leave at about 2:30 in the morning. Most of the patrons had left at that point, with just 2 or 3 stragglers hanging out on the back deck. We each had driven ourselves to the bar, and I had parked on the side of the road in front of the old Thompson house. We stood in front of the house talking for several minutes, and then shared a long kiss. Suddenly, both of us were startled by a very loud thump right next to us. We pulled apart, and I started looking around for what could have made the noise. A few feet away, rolling towards the road, was a huge rock, almost the size of a cantaloupe. I was trying to be brave and picked it up. It must have weighed 5 or 6 pounds. I was pissed, thinking one of his friends at the bar had thrown it at us as an incredibly mean and unfunny joke. No one was around, and as we had been standing around for a while, we would have seen anybody crossing the road. The Checkmate is set about 100 yards from the road, and then off to the side is the patio. If someone had thrown it from across the street, they'd have to have been a shot-put champ to hurl a 6-pound rock almost 200 yards, and even then, why was the rock bouncing quickly towards the road? None of the few remaining bar patrons had moved from their seats, and no one was up or moving around on the other side of the road. It looked as if it had been thrown from the direction of the dark woods surrounding the Thompson house. I walked around the property expecting to find someone hiding in the bushes, but I didn't see or hear anything. Neither of us had seen or heard anyone walking around. It was a still night on a quiet road, and unable to come up with an explanation, we were both pretty freaked out and decided that was our cue to leave. Something around there was clearly not happy with PDA. I'm no longer seeing the guy, as I haven't gone back there since. But one day when the COVID lockdown is over, I'd like to go back and see if any of the current bar staff have any new stories to tell. Besides, it's a fun local bar and a good spot for a low-key night out. Next story. I now live in Northern Virginia, and as it so happens, the Gettysburg battlefield is only about an hour-and-a-half drive away from where I currently reside. If you've ever heard the stories, the battlegrounds and the surrounding neighborhoods are supposed to be extremely haunted. They have some fantastic ghost tours there. and the town and battlefields have their own sort of aura about them. Even without hearing the stories, I went on a ghost tour one night with a friend of mine. At one point in the tour, we arrived at a creek on the edge of town. The story as told by our guide was that on the second day of the battle, a group of wounded Union soldiers had taken refuge in the creek bed, which was dry in the middle of summer. Many of them were badly injured and unable to move. Unfortunately, the summer storm came through and it began to rain heavily, flooding the creek bedding and drowning all of the wounded men. Not one of them survived, according to the tale. Well, it was nighttime when I stood there, and pitch black. I hung back as the tour group moved on to their next stop and looked around. There's a lot of long grasses and cattails growing along the creek now, and I decided just for the fun of it to take some pictures of them in the dark. I had flash on, and of course I made sure that there was no one in front of me or around me at the time. I really didn't expect anything, but figured why not. The next day, as I got home, I was looking through my tour photos, and in one of the pictures I had taken of the creek, you can see the reeds and cattails very clearly, lit up by the flash, floating above them. In the upper hand corner of the picture, dim but still very visible, was a face. It was the side view of a man's face, and you could easily make out a blue cap from the front of a blue-collared coat and yellow buttons. The forehead, eyes, nose, and parts of the chin, as well as what would appear to be dark hair under the cap, were very distinct. Remember again that this face is floating above the tall plants in the creek, and while not transparent, it does seem to be lit up by the flash. The two other photos I took of the same spot within seconds of each other had nothing on it. The blue military-looking coat and cap made me wonder if this could have been the apparition of a Union soldier, hanging around the spot where he'd tragically drowned. I showed the photo to a few people without pointing anything out to them, and every one of them immediately noticed the face. The third story here was told to me by a friend of mine who hails from Michigan. She was in a sorority during her undergrad years, and one of the sorority chapter houses had a ghostly legend attached to it. Apparently, a former sister had graduated and returned to the university years later as a professor. I'm not sure of the details, but her life was brutally ended in her home one night, and I don't think the killer was ever caught. Since then, the sorority house, where she had spent so much of her time of her life in, has been the site of disembodied footsteps, doors opening and closing, lamps turning on and off by themselves, and generally only when one of the sisters was alone in the house at night. She claims that many of the sisters she knew had experiences like this. One day, a visitor of one of the sorority's national councils came for a visit and stayed at the house. Not being from the local area, she decided to do some sightseeing in a nearby city and brought her GPS with her. This was several years ago, before everyone had a GPS on their phones. She had kept the GPS in her room at the sorority house that day and used it to navigate the city. On her way in, she experienced no problems and found her destination without difficulty. On her way home later that night, she plugged in the address to the house and soon noticed that her return route bore no resemblance to the one she'd taken earlier in the day. After many unfamiliar twists and turns, the GPS told her that she had arrived at her destination. The problem was she had not arrived at the sorority house, but a cemetery. After messing around with the device and re-entering the address, she finally found her way back to the sorority house and explained to one of the hosts what had transpired. Upon revealing the name of the cemetery, she was informed that it just so happened to be the one that the murdered former sister was buried in.